ma panen sulle oma arvuti siia.
It's working, but you cannot put it on the side.
Okay, shall we start today's pre-event? Otherwise we run into trouble with our schedule. So choose a place where you can sit. And you can definitely continue your discussions later. Welcome. Welcome to the Computational Law and Blockchain Global Festival. It's the first time Legal Hackers is sort of cooperating globally. And there's about 45 nodes that have been opened. I can hear my echo. Have been opened worldwide. And it's not exactly at the same time because there's a time difference. And globally, some people are sleeping now. But it will actually be the same dates. So 16th to 18th, there is this sort of festival happening in 45 locations all over the world. In Estonia, there's going to be the location in Tartu. So this is a pre-event inviting you to Tartu. It's not that far, although all Tallinn residents think it's very far. 5 hours in a bus or a train or your car, and it's return already. But okay, so my name is Veerpalu. I'm one of the core organizers of the Estonian chapter of the Legal Hackers. There's some people more. One is Evert Nulv, who is somewhere. Wave your hand. And this particular global festival was also assisted and helped and organized by other people who are not the official Legal Hackers organizers. And some of the moderators of the sessions, for example, Asmial Chiseng has already also been a major help to me in organizing this. Okay, I'm an attorney. I do my PhD in University of Tartu in IT law, and I'm also fun to be around. Okay, so what is Legal Hackers? We were asked to introduce to you what is Legal Hackers. It's not only lawyers, it's not only programmers, it's also like you are from the public sectors, policymakers, also designers, also just academics from the university. And they just try to hack or try to create innovation in the place where law and technology meet, sort of, and have trouble, yeah? And how does Legal Hackers operate is that every chapter has its own events. We've had events, I think, since 2015 or 16, I don't remember. But there's hackathons, there's workshops, there's sessions, and just meetups. And we usually communicate in the meetup.com platform. So what is this event? What is the Global Festival? There's a link here, and you can see the notes on this link. Let's try if I can open it.
You want to show them?
There's a map. Oh, okay, I have to switch screens. There's a map I wanted to just show about the locations. And scroll down. Yeah. Oh, no, actually take the festival notes from...
This one?
No. From here.
Okay.
And then now scroll down. So it's happening in these locations. And you can actually watch any location because every location is streamed. So if you click on the location, you can see their website and you can see where it is streamed and you can see every presentation, every discussion at that node. So feel free to not participate in the Tartu node if Tartu is too far away. But you can also participate in, I don't know, Santiago or Sacramento or Washington, D.C. node, and just watch it online. Can we get it back?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
But you can go on.
So the schedule of the event is divided into 3 tracks. One is learn, where there's presentations and sort of like introducing stuff. One is hack, where there's actually hackathons. And some hackathons are global, meaning that everybody can participate all over the world, and they're presented by, and you can click on the link and see. And these are really exciting hacks. If you ever participated in one, I encourage you to try one of those as well. And there's a local hack organized by Agrello, where we develop smart contracts. And we code, we design, we think about the legal stuff. Join in. You don't have to have a team, you can join a team, or you can formulate your own team. And that's it from me, but today's schedule, we have it somewhere, and it's also on your table. The first presenter here today is a small introduction about ICOs and their historical, sort of how they came about, and some fun visuals for you. It will be presented by my colleague Eduardo Silva, who's a Portuguese lawyer. He's working in NJORD law firm and also studying technology and law at Tallinn Technical University. So come on. If you click here, it will go to the next slide.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm making a small presentation about the legal risks that are associated with initial coin offerings. I think everyone is familiarized with initial coin offering, but we're talking about the crowdfunding mechanism of raising early capital by issuing tokens, which might or might not be considered a crowdfunding according to Estonian law. This is, for legal purposes, we are talking about a hybrid between IPO and private equity, because in a sense, their activities are very similar to the activities of initial public offering, but there's no shares or bonds normally, or at least they try to avoid. So the ownership of the company still stays in private hands. This is a graphic from Ernst & Young, and it shows which jurisdictions have raised most funds so far. The numbers are not exactly correct, because in the meantime, some more ICOs already concluded. Estonia is right here with $63 million, equivalent of $63 million, but right now it has surpassed already $100 million. This is a video. Maybe I can click on the image and.
See, it works.
Yes, so this is the development. The first ICO took place in 2013, but this one starts from 2014, and we can see the ICOs are starting to appear. The colors are equivalent to geographical regions, and the size of the circle is the equivalent of the total funds that were raised. Ethereum was one of the first big ICOs, which is also a platform where most of them take place. And as we see, for 2 years, there was very little activity. And suddenly, in the middle of 2016, there's the famous DAO ICO that brought various problems in the United States. And in 2017 has been so far the biggest year for ICOs, and as we can see that there was a boom. So yeah, in the just last seconds, most of them appear, and this until November 2017. So how it works? The tokens are data files, so they are code by themselves. They don't have that much value, but what really gives them value is the fact that they cannot be copied, since the transactions are written in blockchain. This is just an image that shows the different blockchains that exist. Normally, the traditional cryptocurrencies have their own blockchain, which is not a mandatory requirement, but it usually happens. In here, Ethereum blockchain is normally the one that is chosen for ICOs to develop, but recently they have been changing to other blockchains, since the fees in Ethereum have seen a raise. Now, the token sale happens through a smart contract. This is an image where a token could be considered a security when there is an underlying asset that is underlying the smart contract. So basically, when a person pays Ether in exchange for the token, there is the price is variable depending on the price of index, some commodities, currencies, and so on. Normally all the time, ICOs release their white paper, which is for legal purposes. It raises some problems, not problems, but some questions to know if it is it like a prospectus. Is it equivalent to an initial public offering prospectus or not? And it should theoretically be a technical description of the company, about the platform that they're about to release. But at the same time, sometimes it just seems to be a marketing document, and it lacks the technical description, so that ideally would be a mix of both of them. And the white paper structure normally starts with a problem that the company found, and what is their solution, and the product that they're going to develop with the funds raised during the token sale. Token implementation, relation between token and the product. And normally it's also very important the team that is behind the project, also for the investors and the token buyers to know how trustful it can be. And finally, token deployment and plan, which is a roadmap, and normally it has the predictions for when the final product will be released, when the tokens will enter in the exchanges. This is also a very interesting graphic, because it shows the regulatory trends in different countries. You probably cannot see them in here, the description, but I can tell that we can see, for example, Estonia, and the gray from 2008 to 2016, gray means that there is no active position or enough information for the public authorities to take any action. Then between June and September of 2017, it's in yellow, which means that there start to exist active discussions and warnings about the risks of the token sales. And sorry, I was saying South Korea. So Estonia, it's the green. There's active support for ICOs and blockchain, but most recently, since September of last year, it turned into gray, which is a position that the ICOs are regulated by applicable laws, in accordance with their nature. So this is the stage where there's analysis of the token, legal analysis to determine if it is a security or what normally called also utility or commodity token, which is the other.
The last slide, it wasn't your interpretation, what's the source of this?
It's Ernst & Young, this document that they released in the end of last year. And finally, I would like to talk about the legal risks of ICOs. One of the main risks is the insufficient information to token purchasers. This can raise some problems relating to consumer protection, for example, because in here we are not talking about accredited investors. We are talking to offer of tokens that is made to the general public. There are also scams. I saw recently in the news that there was ICO founders that just escaped with some 2 or 3 million, equivalent to $1 million after the ICO was finished. There's also the problems with pyramid schemes and commonly known as Ponzi schemes also. And there is also a big legal issue that is related with money laundering and terrorist financing, and this is actually where Estonia took the first steps to regulate cryptocurrencies, which are not necessarily regulation and licenses for ICOs, because the money laundering licenses are related with exchange platforms and also with wallets, with companies that hold or issue the private keys for crypto wallets. So then there are also the IT risks, technological risks. This, for example, is not so much a technological risk, but more as a human factor problem. That is the loss of bitcoins, for example, since the people can own their own private keys, and so far over 4 million bitcoins are completely out of circulation, out of the 16.7 that exist. And also other risks are the cybersecurity risks. In here we have some examples of mirror sites that pretended themselves to be the ICO launching company, and this way appropriate with the funds that were not supposed to go to them. Or also by employee mistakes, sometimes it happens that tokens are irreversibly lost due to some mistake, and it ends up in a frozen wallet, which happened in this Parity, for example. And this is my presentation. Open to some discussion.
We have time for questions. So, if I'm not mistaken, the one who holds the private key holds the funds and the money. How usual are the procedures regarding the holding of this or using this private key is somehow explained in this white paper, so that I would say that if this private key is held by one certain person, he or she can just vanish. But if there are some procedures surrounding this private key, some risks might be mitigated. So have you read the white paper which explains how are we going to manage this private key?
Most of the time, the ICOs accept transactions from this ERC20 equivalent wallets, so they themselves don't have the service of providing wallet to the clients. So, Yeah, they don't operate. That's why I was saying that the licenses for money laundering are not very. They're not for ICOs. They are more for exchange platforms, for payment services that use cryptocurrencies as their means of payment. Because normally what ICOs show in their white paper is the white list of wallets that they accept that are equivalent and they can work with them. For example, they most of the time don't accept Ethereum or a Bitcoin payment from Coinbase because this is a company that holds the private key of its customers. Mm-hmm.
But what about the private key of the wallet where the funds are transmitted by the investors?
You mean the...
Like I'm doing an ICO.
Mm-hmm.
So if I get funded, the funds will be transmitted into my wallet.
Yes.
I can use this wallet if I know the private key.
Yes, but this is your wallet to which...
This should be like a company's or team wallet instead of my wallet. Because I'm not doing my personal ICO, I'm doing a company's or teams or project's ICO. This is the question.
Okay, I understand you're saying if the raised funds belong to the person as a...
So my question was, do any of these ICO projects in this white paper explain what are the procedures regarding this private key of the wallet where all the funds will be transmitted?
Just to be clear, are you talking about the people who are receiving tokens? Or are you talking about the project?
The project.
The project itself, not the receiver. Okay.
The issuer, so to
that
say.
was a little bit unclear.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the project itself? Yeah. So in the white paper, there is a description of what the project is supposed to do with the funds.
Yeah.
It's a critical part of the white paper. Sure.
Yeah. But
what he's meaning is that...
Yeah, I understand the question.
There is like, for example, for activating nuclear weapons, there's a whole line of procedures. And the key question here is that who is holding...
The question...
inside of the organization.
Yeah, the question is if the white paper says clearly if the funds that are raised go to a wallet that belongs to the legal person, which is the company, or to the...
There are certain procedures surrounding it, so that a good example of the nuclear weapon, so that there has to be two keys simultaneously turning.
Yeah, but I think this is not the kind of information that should be in the white paper. It should probably be in the token sale agreement. And yeah, should be developed because the white paper itself.
Like
in the white paper, no.
No, usually these issues are not covered in the papers. But there is we have basically the issue that some lawyers have analyzed is who is the parties of the sale agreement. Yes. So the terms of sale, when you sell the tokens, like who are the parties? When the party says that he receives this and he issues this, then he sort of says that the wallet belongs to him. But there is no track record of how you can trace this, that this wallet belongs to the legal entity who is actually saying that they issue something. As far as we know, there are no standards for this. I have true. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions at this point? Later on we'll have a discussion and then we can address all the burning issues. But let's move on to the next presenter. Eduardo, can you give the mic to Michael?
Oh, great.
And,
What do I do with that?
Michael Gallagher is
Put it on my time.
Michael's boss. Long ago.
Was I a good boss?
Yes, very good.
Be a
And
tech
he
that. Oh, I see.
has a long track record as a lawyer. And he was commercial litigator in
There we go.
Philadelphia once.
Thanks.
Long time ago, even longer time ago than and he ran the Eesti Õiguskeskus for
I helped create it.
a whole chunk of his career. And
8 years, yeah.
EuroCollege and multiple things, and now
Right.
he's teaching negotiation.
Conflict management, strategic thinking, and developing legal network around digital assets.
Okay. And he's already on multiple occasions performed at the Legal Hackers event.
I have.
So welcome, and
Thank
the
you.
floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me thank Legal Hackers, and I want to give them a plug because one of the topics I talk about a lot is how to make innovation more systematic. How can we move from just ad hoc, you have a really great idea, to we are all connected with the generation of ideas that fit together, and we can build a more innovative ecology. The example everybody points to is Silicon Valley, but it's not the only one. And the only way to do that, we know, is through networking, is through organizations like Legal Hackers, not the only one, but certainly one example of an organization that is dedicated to bring different people from different groups together and to try to share what we know, and so everybody has a chance to think about ways to do things better. So I think Legal Hackers is great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to chat here today, and I hope everybody here will say, hey, we should share that value that Legal Hackers is trying to promote and cooperate with them more. So thanks a lot. That's my plug. As Anna said, I'm Michael Gallagher. I'm an American lawyer, trained in Philadelphia and practiced law there for around a decade in commercial litigation primarily. My mother is Estonian, which got me interested very early on when Estonian independence was reclaimed. And I came here in 1994 as part of the lawyers parachuting into this region. I parachuted into Estonia to try to help promote what we used to call legal reform. Legal reform meaning to make legal institutions more accountable to the public and to try to reintegrate Estonia with Western institutions. That was a long time ago. And initially we thought it would happen quickly. It has happened slowly. It was a very interesting adventure, and I would say not quite over, but we've made incredible progress in Estonia, and I'm really proud to be here and to be part of that and try to pass on that to the next generation of people who were born either just before or during the independence time. I'm here to talk about a very specific question, and that question is, what the hell is the SEC doing about ICOs? Now, I know a little bit about that because as an American lawyer, I've studied securities law and I practiced law with some securities questions, so it's an interesting question for me. But before I talk about that, I have to make a qualification. As a lawyer, this is not securities law advice, okay? If you have any questions about complying with SEC regulations, or you're in trouble with the SEC or the CFTC or any blue sky regulations in the United States, go to a securities lawyer. This is not fooling around. This is a very sophisticated body of law, and you need people who are licensed, trained, regularly practicing in this area. So I'm not going to give you legal advice. What I am going to do is I'm going to talk about what this SEC is, what they're trying to do, and what significance that has for us. So this is sort of, we're trying to take out some lessons learned from the experience that we've had so far. And I think that's far more relevant than me talking about the technical aspects of the 1933 Securities Act. Before I get started, I will make I would have three caveats about this presentation. The first caveat is, when we think about securities law in general, and you think about American securities law, there's a temptation to think of this as some sort of monolith. It's sort of like the Justinian Code, or it's based upon some really, really deep, honest truths about human nature. This is nonsense. The American securities law is based upon is trying to find a practical solution to a really serious problem that came up in 1929. Okay? It is pragmatic. It is changeable. It is not fixed. And as we'll see, it will change as the securities laws of all of the jurisdictions around the world as we get into the 21st century. So the first caveat, when I talk about securities law, don't think of this as a fixed thing. It's a moving target, and it's going to evolve, I guarantee it. Second, when we talk about blockchain, when we talk about crypto assets, we're talking about a global phenomenon. This is not a jurisdiction-based thing, and so the laws of jurisdictions are only part of the story. No single jurisdiction, United States included, can monopolize or control what's going on. That's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen because the people, the brains, the technology will just move to another jurisdiction. And that's what's happening. And you're seeing this play out. As you watch over time, countries all over the world are saying, hey, wait a minute, this is a pretty interesting technology. This is some pretty interesting stuff. We could benefit from attracting people who know something about it to our jurisdiction. What do we do to get there? And countries around the world are trying different things. Switzerland with Crypto Valley. Germany is making noises. UK is making noises. Gibraltar says we're the first country that is going to regulate crypto assets. Offshores. We have Singapore. We have United States in certain quarters, not all. So all over the world, even China, by the way, who had an ICO ban, still is talking about how they can bring more blockchain technology into China. So we have what's called a forum shopping situation. Very similar to what happened in the United States back around 100 years ago. Around 100 years ago, corporations started to wake up to the idea that they were not local. America is a huge place, and they don't have to be located in any given state. They can incorporate in any state, and they can move around. And so they started to ask states, well, how difficult is it for us to work with you or you? And all of the states began to race against each other to say, we can be friendlier. Why? Well, if corporations register in the state, the corporation has assets there, they can be taxed. There are ancillary benefits, the legal community benefits, there's intellectual knowledge growing about corporate law, and Delaware won what was called the race to the bottom. Coincidentally, I grew up in Delaware, I practiced law a little bit there, and I can say there were real benefits for Delaware to win the race to the bottom and attract more than, I think, something like half to 3/4 of the Fortune 500 companies in the United States are registered in Delaware. The same thing is happening with crypto assets now. So here in Estonia, we want to play in that game, but it's a game that we have to figure out how all of the other countries in the world, how the market is moving, how these countries are thinking about it, so that we can play the game. The United States is just one actor. The SEC is just one party of one actor. Third caveat, blockchain and crypto assets are new. We've only had blockchain for a little bit. We understand its capacity. We've only started doing ICOs. So I think the first one was 2013. And nobody in the world right now fully understands the capacities of these technologies. Sure, people say a lot about, well, it can do this, it can do that. This is what we know now, right? And so people are experimenting. But it's a little bit like the early era of the automobile. When people invented the automobile, the initial thought was it's going to be an anti-pollution device, right? It'll clean up the cities of all the horseshit that was in the city streets. It'll be so much better because it'll be cleaner. Nobody envisioned what the automobile would eventually become in modern society back then, right? And there were no laws that regulated how automobiles should be manufactured. We had no defect legislation. We didn't even have very many traffic laws. And so there were all sorts of accidents happening, people smashing into each other, falling out of cars were exploding, but people used it anyway because they liked it. Same thing is happening now with blockchains and crypto assets. We don't really have very clear standards. We don't really know what we're doing. But because there's value added, which I will discuss a little bit later here, people are going to keep using it. They're going to keep experimenting with it. And the driving force here are not regulators. It's the market. Okay, so those are the three caveats. American securities law is not monolithic. Blockchain, crypto is global, not jurisdictional. And finally, we are really early in the learning curve. So we should be ready to be in a learning mode, not in a telling people what's what mode. So with those caveats, what the hell is SEC doing about ICOs? To answer this question, we have to answer the question, what is the SEC? And that takes us back to the founding legal documents that created the SEC back in the 1930s. And to understand those, you have to go back to the 1920s in the United States. The 1920s in the United States was an incredibly unique period. It was a period when a lot of people were waking up to the idea for the first time that we had a national market. And companies, because of the technology that was becoming available at that time, could suddenly start thinking about, hey, I can sell all over the country, right? I can get really big, and at getting really big, I can make lots of money. This hadn't happened before that much. And this has become now conventional wisdom in the 1920s, and a lot of people are waking up to this idea and saying, I want to be part of that. I want to participate in that. And the only way to do that was to buy securities, to buy shares in the companies that were trying to do these things. And there was an obsession about buying securities. People were buying securities on margin. They were buying their life savings in this. People were looking at stock prices every day. Through the 20s, this obsession grew until 1929. And then we had the bubble popped, the bottom fell out, and we had the big crash of 1929. That was really bad. But things got a lot worse, because then in the 1930s, we had the Great Depression. 1932, FDR, President Roosevelt was elected, 1932. He was a populist president, and he said, guys, we have to fix this depression. What's the first thing we have to do? And everybody thought, who was advising him at that time, the depression was caused by the stock market crash. Right? That's what they thought, and so they wanted to fix that first. We don't want ever a stock market crash like that ever to happen again. Okay. By the way, economists now would dispute that. We don't really believe anymore that the stock market crash caused the Great Depression. Economists think that the American tariff system that blocked out the world's goods and created an enormous trade war was probably a much bigger factor. But okay, that was the thinking at that time. And so in order to solve that problem, the populist president said, I want a new system of laws that protects the people, the mom and pop investors, so that these people won't be fooled anymore by those horrible Wall Street barons, right? We're going to protect the people. They said, okay, that's what we'll do. So the really smart people came up with an idea that is, well, in order to protect the people, we're going to enact two big laws, the 1933 Securities Act, the 1934 Securities Exchange Act. Those are the two major laws, and a bunch of other minor laws that went on that were enacted up through 1940. And what those laws do, when you strip them down to the essentials, is, number one, they require any company that wants to sell shares of stock on a secondary exchange, that stock has to be registered. It has to be registered with the SEC. And that means filing really complicated information that identifies all of the risks that mom and pop might have if they buy that security. And these are really long documents. They're very complicated. And it's required. You can't sell otherwise. The 1934 Act that says you're going to have ongoing filing requirements of updating all of this information all the time. And if anything in there is false that misleads investors, we have securities fraud as a remedy. And securities fraud is a really big deal. Why? Because under Rule 10b-5, it has criminal liability. It has civil liability with treble damages. This is serious stuff, right? And later court cases said you can be guilty or liable for fraud even by silence. If your silence misleads investors, you can be liable. You say, I didn't say anything. Too bad. You should have. So in this regime, you can say, and everybody would agree, this is really heavy-handed stuff, right? This is a centralized system that imposes enormous requirements on companies to file lots and lots of paper, and to be honest, that nobody reads except a few experts. Mom and pop don't go down to Washington to the SEC and read these types of information. It's ridiculous. But some people do, and the anti-fraud provisions are scary enough that people pay lawyers lots and lots of money, and they pay investment bankers lots and lots of money to get all these documents right. And of course, the lawyers are delighted to do it. The investment bankers are delighted to do it as well. And so the system has prospered, and it works. In the 20th century, it worked really well. By and large, the The secondary exchanges have functioned much, much better than they used to. We've gotten rid of some of the more outrageous stuff that used to happen there, right? And there's another reason why this worked. It worked because in the 20th century, as I alluded to a minute ago, it paid to get big, right? This is the whole business model of the 20th century. Big is good. If you're big, you have a competitive advantage. Think General Motors, think General Electric. Big companies have big market share. Automatically, that is a competitive advantage because the little guys can't raise the money to get in. They don't have it, they can't get access to it. And so the big companies are very happy with a very expensive securities law regime, right? It's another barrier to entry. It keeps the status quo just the way they like it. And they don't, look, we go raising huge amounts of money. Yeah, we pay a couple billion to lawyers and whatnot. That's no big deal for them. And that was fine through the 1980s when I was practicing law in Philadelphia. But things began to change. And what changed, Fred Wilson, who was a very prominent VC in New York, described this very well just a couple days ago. He said, you know, back in the 80s when he was a VC, capital for VCs was very scarce. Nobody was really putting a lot of money into what's called early stage investment. This was considered to be very, very risky. Only idiots did that, right? I say in Philadelphia, if my client came in and said, I want to do some early stage investment, I say, look, you go to a psychiatrist. Don't do that. It's way too risky. Okay, that was the 80s. Suddenly in the 90s, things changed. Well, what was it? I'll say in one word, Microsoft. Not just Microsoft, but Microsoft gives you the idea. Here was a company that started with nothing. It doesn't have any factories. It doesn't make any products. All it had was computer code, right? That's all, which it licensed out. And Microsoft started from nothing, and boom, it became one of the most dominant corporations in America. And people woke up to the idea, you know, something has changed here. Suddenly, early stage investment is starting to look a little more attractive. Well, one reason is because software development is cheap. It's a lot cheaper than building factories, so let's invest in that. We don't take as much risk. And another one, this is a growth market, right? There's going to be all sorts of software needed. And so Fred said, suddenly in the 90s, there was money everywhere. As a VC, you could very easily fill up funds. Everybody wanted to be your friend. And suddenly, the whole VC market, the early stage investment market, changed. And that was okay, because that had nothing to do with securities laws. The VCs and other actors were all what's called accredited investors. That means they're already rich, they're already clever, and so the securities laws of the United States said, you're exempt. You don't need to be part of any of that registration stuff. You can just buy whatever you want and go enjoy it. So they had this nice exemption, and they used it, right? And they made incredible deals, and Fred and a lot of other people got very wealthy. But they started to complain. The complaint was, look, this stuff is really risky. We accept that. Like for a normal VC doing early stage investment, if 90% of the companies they invested are losers, 70% totally bust, another 20% I never would have invested if I had known they were going to be that lousy, that's okay. As long as 10% are moving up and scaling, you're a genius. That is an amazing VC record. So this is really high-risk stuff. And they need to park their money in a lot of different places in order for their model to work. And they say, you know, we're a little bit held back here. We're held back because when you do an early-stage investment, it takes around 10 years for a VC before they get an exit. They can only exit where they get bought by a listed company, right? And so that company then takes over all the assets, and VCs and all the other early investors cash out. Or the startup does its own IPO, gets subjected to American securities regulation, and then the company's stock is listed on the exchanges, and the VCs can then sell on the exchanges. And they said 10 years is too slow for early stage. And they're right. They're right because they know well before 10 years the relative value of these investments. And when they know that, they can cash out and look for other opportunities. They can't do that if their money is locked up. So getting earlier exits is good for the VCs, it's good for everybody. But how do you do it? Now, there's been a huge amount of discussion about this in light of the way the American securities law are structured. I'll summarize it by saying it's really hard. It's really hard to structure this in a way that you can move from accredited investors to everybody else without violating securities law or violating the way people think about securities law. And there are endless conversations that I was watching about these types of efforts. They really haven't gone very far. So, okay, we lived with it. But then along came crowdfunding. Now, this is a little bit of a distraction from ICOs, but crowdfunding exploded in the early part of this century, and a lot of people initially were very skeptical about crowdfunding. They said, you know, who's going to give money to people you don't know for projects that may or may not work, highly risky, and what do you get back? Do you get maybe a reward? What's the big deal here? And then crowdfunding took off. Now, I see crowdfunding as a confirmation of what was going on in the 1920s. People want to participate in value-added stuff, even if it's risky. They know it's risky. They want to do it anyway. And that's why crowdfunding works. And crowdfunding was okay, except it's just a one-off, right? Crowdfunding gives you a chance to do earlier stage investment, and that's great if you want to make a movie, an independent movie, which is now Kickstarter is one of the primary, or Indiegogo is one of the primary sources of funding for independent movies. All that's great, but it's not great for tech startups. And so people still looking around for ways to do better early stage investment. Along came blockchain, and blockchain with ICOs and tokens. And a lot of people said, you know, this is really interesting because first, you look at tokens, it gives an early exit, right? It allows people to invest right away and get out very early. And that can create a more efficient use of early stage investment funds. So from a VC point of view, this made total sense. Everybody understood, sure, it's high risk, but early stage investing is high risk by definition. So anybody who's going to go into this understands that there is enormous risk here, but there's also potential for enormous payoff. And so I started talking about ICOs back in, I think, 2015, 2016. And when I did that those days, people would look at me like, what are you talking about? This is strange stuff. Crypto, what? Michael, go, as I would say to my former clients, go to a site and say, maybe you need a little help here. This is a little bit weird. We don't want to talk about blockchain or crypto assets. And that all changed last year. And last year, suddenly, as the wonderful video showed, we had an explosion of interest in ICOs and tokens. Now, I wasn't overly surprised. I was only surprised how quickly it happened. It was amazing, you know, from month to month, the way people talked about crypto assets. One minute they were weird, the next minute Bill Mugliar is writing a book about blockchain that everybody can't wait to buy, it sells out. The next minute the people are talking about making hundreds of millions of dollars worth of from an ICO, and it goes on and on and on from there. Well, a lot of the market players were saying, look, this isn't going to last. It's not going to last because the regulators are not going to allow it to last. It's going to be changing next year very soon. And they were right. And when you go back to the SEC, you can understand why they're right. The mandate of the SEC is to protect investors. That's what they do. They don't like investor risk that's unmanaged. And when they were looking at ICOs in 2017, they were seeing a lot of fraud. They were seeing a lot of people disappearing with money. They were seeing a lot of abuses. And they said, we're not going to allow that. And so you saw warnings from the SEC, and then you saw enforcement actions, which is what they do when they don't like you. They started enforcement action against you. It's also got one ICO launch stopped in its tracks by a court. Now, the tech market said, wait a minute, you can't do that. These are not securities. They're tokens. We're not giving away any corporate rights. You don't have any governance rights. These aren't shares of stock. This is something totally different. As Bill Mugair would say, it's a totally new asset class. Well, the SEC said, okay, yeah, but take a look at the Howey test. It was decided by the United States Supreme Court in 1946, which defines what is a security and what is not. The Howey test, by the way, involved a Florida real estate deal where developers were selling property and buying back leases and then rewarding investors with how much money they made when they grew citrus crops. The SEC said, these are securities, you have not registered them, you're violating the securities laws. They said, this is not securities, these are real estate contracts. Went to the Supreme Court and said, yeah, these are securities because they satisfy what has been called a four-prong test, four factors that go into deciding this. Number one, are people putting in money, right? Or later on, just assets. You put in money somewhere. Yes. Okay. By the way, you may compare that with ICOs. You're putting in money. Yes. Number two, are you doing that with the expectation of profit? In the Florida case, yes. ICOs, look at the way people talked about ICOs last year. Definitely, right? Number three, is it in a common venture, a single company or project? Yes. ICOs, yes. And number four, is that profit derived from the activities of the promoter or third parties, not the investor? In Florida case, yes. And in most ICOs, yes. So under the Howey test, a lot of early stage ICO white papers were obviously securities. They were selling securities. And a number of people commented on this even last year to say, I don't know what you're smoking, but these are all securities and you're not complying with the United States securities laws. And you're going to get in trouble. And the tech people said, well, we have transcended securities law. We don't have to worry about that. Well, okay. They do. And when the enforcement action started last year, people woke up to that idea. Then when they had the China ICO ban, okay, things got a little bit more serious. Then other countries started to issue a lot of warnings. We had a South Korea ban. We had all sorts of regulatory action last year, so that towards the end of the year, a lot of people were saying, you know, we have to really talk to our lawyers again and figure out how to do this sort of stuff without risking enormous penalties. Now keep in mind that, you know, it's okay for kids to risk enormous penalties who don't have any assets, who don't care. But when you're talking about institutional money, or you're talking about VCs or angel investors, they're not going to do this sort of stuff unless they have a clear understanding what the legal risks are. And so they're saying, okay, guys, solve this problem. And along came, I think it was around October last year, where some clever lawyers in California from Cooley, there's a tech law firm out there, came up and said, we have a really clever solution here. And the solution is called, well, they called it SAFE, but it's more recently been called SAFT, Simple Agreement for Future Tokens. And they say, if you use SAFT, you'll be okay. It satisfies securities laws. It's okay. And people wanted to believe it was okay, and so you had some really big companies, people with a lot of financial background and also capital, say, yeah, okay, we'll use SAFT. Kik, for example, did its ICO based on a SAFT. Filecoin, what's it called? Filecoin did a SAFT. And what is SAFT? Understanding SAFT helps you understand a lot about securities law in the United States and elsewhere, because it's a lot of models on it. What they say is, we're going to break this transaction into two parts. The first part, where the issuer of the token says to accredited investors only, hey, let's do a deal. You give us cash, and we'll give you back a promise. That promise will be to issue tokens to you when we use the cash and our platform is ready. And then when our platform is ready and we have our business ecology set up, then we'll give you a lot of tokens because you've already paid for it. And okay, that's stage one. Now, don't let anyone fool you. That is a security contract, okay? By its definition, the VCs are doing that for money. They're putting money into a venture for profit, that the profit is going to be caused by the activities of the people launching it. It is a classic securities contract. But that's okay, because these guys are accredited investors. They're allowed to do that without registration. That's okay. Then comes the tricky part. After the platform is ready, they transfer the tokens. Now the accredited investors have all these tokens, and they have to distribute them as utility tokens to say they're not securities. Now you just need the tokens in order to be part of that business ecology. You need it to be able to buy and sell stuff, right? You're not doing it for investment anymore. You're just doing it to be part of that business model. And so the VCs or the other investors in the tokens would then do the distribution, by the way, often offshore, so they could sell it to investors who are not in the United States. That's how SAFT works. And people thought it would be okay by the end of last year. I was reading a lot of articles to say, this is the great new thing, we've solved the problem. We have not solved the problem, okay? And in the new year, the SEC acted again. And what the SEC did is it set out, nobody knows how many precisely, but it used new capacity. The SEC has created 2 new departments that is solely dedicated to looking closely at crypto markets. That shows you that they believe crypto markets are here to stay, and that shows you their enforcement is here to stay. So they have 2 new departments, and those 2 new departments issued around 200 subpoenas to people issuing ICOs, professionals, other people involved in ICOs. Now, 200 subpoenas is a lot of subpoenas. These are not just one-page questions. The subpoena is a demand for information and documentation backed up by courts, so you can't say, no, I'm not going to answer. But it's a really big deal, these subpoenas. They're asking for huge amounts of information. Nobody expected, yeah.
Only to the U.S. issuers?
They're only to U.S., that's right. I'll talk about extraterritoriality in a minute. And so nobody's talking about how many, who got them, what they're doing with them, but everybody got really shaken when they said, holy cow, 200 subpoenas, that's a lot. And that means the SEC is, number 1, getting deeper into this market. They want to understand it. And number 2, they're gearing up for more enforcement actions. And so everyone said, okay, that's not what we want. And then the SEC issued a statement, which just came out I think it was about 3 weeks or a month ago, in which they said, summarizing, look, guys, there's a lot of really bad shit going on here. There's a lot of illegal activity. We don't like it. And we want you to know that not only the issuers of these tokens are in trouble, but also are the exchanges that are buying and selling them. Why? Because they are not licensed to issue securities, and these are securities, and they are not registered securities. And though these guys are in trouble, and the professionals who are advising people that they can do this are also in trouble. So everybody's in trouble. And when that statement came out, everybody ran for the toilets and said, oh boy, we really have to rethink this. Now, to give you an example of what that means, there's a really nice company in California called Stream. I don't know, has anybody heard of Stream? No? No? Stream? No? Stream is a really good bunch of guys and ladies. When I say guys, I mean men and women, by the way. Stream's mission is to try to get people paid who upload content on the web, bloggers, or anybody who is doing this. Right now, it's really hard to get paid for this. So enormous amounts of content are coming up on the web. Some of it's really great stuff, but it's really hard to get paid for it, right? You have to have advertising revenue, or you have to have subscriptions. It's very hard to make a living doing that stuff. And Stream wants to change that because they want to upgrade the quality of the content you find on the web. This is a really good mission, right? We don't want just Facebook. We want something better. So Stream is already doing that, and they're doing it by allowing people to give tips to content creators. You can push a button and it'll send you however much money you want to send to the creator, say, hey, I really like that, here's $1. And if a lot of people send dollars, then you're doing okay. Stream recognized that this would be a lot easier. There would be a lot fewer transaction costs using blockchain and tokens, right? If you just had tokens, there's almost no friction, there's no transaction costs. It's great. And so, of course, they were very attracted to do an ICO. They're originally just going to do a normal ICO. Then they say, we're going to do a SAFT. And then they sort of even announced we're going to do this SAFT, and it's going to be everything's being okay. And then just about a couple of weeks ago, after the subpoenas went out and after the SEC statement, the Stream has said, yeah, we're postponing this indefinitely. And everywhere you read in the media now, you hear the phrase regulatory uncertainty. Regulatory uncertainty. We're a little bit nervous about what's going to happen next, and so therefore serious people are cutting back on their plans to do ICOs, right? And this is not good because we want serious people to be experimenting with this new technology to be able to get it right so we can learn faster what it can do and what it can't do. So there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty here. By the way, in a forum about SAFT, just happened about 2 weeks ago in Boston, lawyers got into a big shouting match about whether SAFT is okay under securities law or not. Another side issue I didn't mention before is that there's an organization called the CFCT in the United States, which is a commodities futures regulatory body, and they brought an action claiming that a set of tokens were actually commodities. And a New York court said, yeah, they are. And the CFC said, and there was a fraudulent transaction involving those commodities. And the court said, okay, you can proceed with that prosecution. So one lady said, you know, this first transaction with lawyers, right, you may think it's okay because they're accredited investors under the 1933 Act, but this is a commodity contract. And it's also governed by the commodity futures regime, and the CFCT may bring an enforcement action against you as well. And then other lawyers said, yeah, and by the way, you have no guarantee that the SEC or CFCT or any court will say, yeah, we agree that you can break this transaction into parts. They may look at it as a single unit. And they said, no, there's a lot of uncertainty with SAFT. And so I would caution you, if you're talking about that with anybody or thinking about doing this, hold back, think about it, because there's a lot to learn about whether SAFT is okay. We're early on in that process, by the way. So what is the SEC going to do? What's going to happen is we're going to see more enforcement actions this year. And unfortunately, that's a pretty slow process. And when every enforcement action happens, the people sued have a chance you're either going to settle with the SEC or you're going to fight it in court. If they fight it in court, there may be a case that goes up to the US Supreme Court, and we may get a Supreme Court decision on whether what the SEC is doing is actually consistent with the Howey test. We might get a new ruling, and that might clarify things a lot. Don't hold your breath waiting for that, okay? Because a lot of people get sued by the SEC, settle. And when they settle, what happens, there's a public settlement agreement, and when the settlement agreement is out, people see what did the SEC say was okay. And then they'll all do that. Then everybody will start saying, yeah, the SEC said that was okay in this case, so we're going to try to do the same thing. Well, that's a very slow, step-by-step process. Nobody knows how fast it will go. And I think at least we're talking about 2, 3, 4 years.
One question?
Yes, sir.
Can SEC change its mind? That previously we had this kind of settlement, but now we interpret the characteristics a bit different, so you cannot take this to the bank, so to say.
No. What everybody says is you have to be sensitive to the facts of every case. So every case is a little bit different. No SAFT is identical with another SAFT. No ICO is identical with another ICO. And so to the extent you think you could copycat, you better be really careful that you'd hit it exactly right. Because if you don't, the SEC may say, we haven't changed our mind, but this is different, and we don't like what you're doing. So there's risk there, yes, so that's right.
Legal uncertainty remains.
Absolutely right, and it's big in the United States. Now, the good news is the securities laws of the United States have very limited extraterritoriality. In other words, they are not designed to cover securities transactions everywhere around the world. Going back to our good old Franklin Roosevelt, we only wanted to protect mom and pop investors in the United States. Those are the people we really care about. They don't really care about Europeans or Africans or anyone else. And so there is this limit to what the SEC is doing. And you're seeing, by the way, certain ICO platforms saying they're not going to sell tokens to any Americans because they don't want to get hooked up with the SEC. But the SEC is not going to be able to export what they're doing because the legal foundation is limited to basically to the American shores. So we're stuck in this slow regime with the SEC. There are other solutions, and the people are pushing for them because America is, again, it's not a monolithic type of system. We have all sorts of actors involved. One of the actors, of course, are the investors who initially were saying, we want this type of solution. We need this type of solution. And what they're saying is, look, this type of problem has been encountered before. We had exactly the same problem when the web first came up. When the first people started building platforms that you could upload content onto, like Facebook, they had a big problem because they were getting sued by copyright holders all the time. And so this was a risk to destroy the web. And so what did we do? Went to Congress to pass a law to create what's called a safe harbor. And the safe harbor that was passed was called the Digital Millennial Copyright Act, or DMCA. I don't know if anybody of you is aware of that law. Anybody? Yeah? Okay, I feel like an old fart already. So the DMCA basically was a safe harbor saying, if you build a web platform and you operate it and you follow these rules, very carefully, don't deviate in any way, copyright holders cannot sue you. And the DMCA is what made all of these platforms possible. Facebook, Twitter, even Google, Amazon, they all take advantage of the DMCA. And so that worked. And so the VCs and whatnot are saying, look, we've done this before. All we need is a safe harbor for crypto, right? Let's do a crypto safe harbor. And we have people trying to draft safe harbor provisions that would work. Not just in the United States, by the way. All over the world, people are thinking, how can I create a safe harbor for my jurisdiction? Because remember, there is a jurisdictional competition going on. And so the people who have a really great safe harbor are likely to attract really smart people, institutional money, and they can play the game faster than other people. So safe harbors are, I guarantee it, you're going to hear a lot about safe harbors for crypto and ICOs this year, next year. It's the next big thing. Will safe harbors come in the United States? Keep in mind, the SEC has absolutely zero incentive to create these. Going back to the 1930s, as I said, the role of the SEC is to protect investors, period. Their job is not to create new fancy markets or to facilitate early stage investors. They don't do that, right? I remember there was a movie where the assassin was called up by her boss and said, I don't want you to kill that person, I want you to keep him alive. And she said, I'm sorry, I do dead, I don't do alive. Right? And the same with SEC. We do investor protection, that's it. Right? So don't expect the SEC suddenly to start thinking about, okay, let's facilitate a new market. They don't do that. They only did that with crowdfunding, where they created a crowdfunding exception to the SEC laws a couple years ago after Congress forced them to do it. The Congress enacted a new law, and it's a crappy type of exception, safe harbor. So don't expect the SEC to do it. Will Congress in the US do it? You might recall, you probably have heard, that the American political environment is in a rather weird position. We have a president under investigation. The Congress is highly partisan. The parties are not talking to each other. We have a major midterm election coming up in November. In this environment, forget it. You're not going to get Congress's attention to draft a major safe harbor legislation this year. Maybe next year, the year after, something like that, but not now. And so, by the way, Congress is holding hearings in the United States on crypto. They've had, I think, 2 or 3. But the congressmen, the senators, and House people who are doing this have admitted. They said, look, the purpose of these hearings is that we don't have a clue what you're talking about. This is educational for us. We've got to understand what this is about before we do anything. Lesson learned. If you want to play the crypto game, don't leave critical actors in your ecology out like that, right? This is where small countries can have an advantage. Include people, educate them, make them part of the conversation so you don't have to teach them the basic vocabulary like we're trying to do in the Senate and the House to say, this is a crypto asset, this is a blockchain, right? That takes time. We don't really have that kind of time when you're playing in a global forum shopping type of arrangement. So Congress is probably not going to act this year. They don't know what they're talking about. And by the way, most of the legislatures around the world are in a similar position. They don't really understand what's going on, and they don't know what to do. So while people will talk about safe harbors, people will be pushing different kinds of safe harbor. We don't really know precisely what that safe harbor should look like. The Swiss are saying that, look, it should be at least that if you are offering a token as a prepayment for goods or services to be offered later, that should be okay. That should not be a security, it should be a utility token, and we're not going to sue you for that in Switzerland. Okay, that's a limited type of safe harbor conversation. I don't know if it's strong enough. I'm not an expert on Swiss law. The Germans are saying it's something similar. But again, this is also a limited type of activity here. ICOs are far more complex than just prepayments. And so we expect a lot more on safe harbors, but that's sort of maybe the next presentation. That's not the only thing going on. What is also going on is a lot of people are saying we need to learn faster. And so we know how to do that. We can learn faster when we have a learning institution. And even the Winklevoss twins, who have never been noted to be deep thinkers, they made a lot of money settling with Mr. Zuckerberg from Facebook, and they invested all of that money in Bitcoin very early on. They became Bitcoin billionaires. Now they're maybe Bitcoin 100 millionaires after the correction. But the Winklevoss twins and others have said we need what's called an SRO. SRO is abbreviation for self-regulating organization, SRO. And the head of the CFTC said, yes, that's exactly what we need here, and go create one. Now, what is an SRO? By the way, the United States is not the only place talking about SROs. Everybody's talking about SROs around the world. The UK has had one for a while. Switzerland's had one for a while. We should have one here. I don't know if they exist, but we should. If they don't, we should create one. An SRO is a non-governmental body whose job it is to get contacts with the market, with the technology people, finding out what is going on, what works, what doesn't work, and why, and coming up with what's called best practices. If they are authorized by law, they can issue regulations, but that's not necessarily what they should do. What they should do is what Legal Hackers is doing here, which is to bring people together so everybody can learn faster and learn more quickly what types of regulation make sense. I've heard, by the way, that there's some money floating around to draft new law. To be very blunt, I think this is stupid, right? Because nobody in the world right now knows how that law should look, right? We don't have it. It's not a time where we come up with answers. It's a time where we come up with learning. And to do that, we need networking. We need institutions that are dedicated, first, to track what are people talking about around the planet. What are they learning in Singapore? What are the Chinese talking about when they have their SRO? By the way, they have just formed an SRO to learn about blockchain, bringing blockchain to China, right? What are they doing there? Do we know? Well, the only way to know is if it's somebody's job to track those things and find out and tell us. Well, whose job is that here? I don't know.
Estonia, I think that
Finance Estonia.
Finance Estonia has
I'm not talking about an institution. I'm talking about an individual. Whose job is it day to day to track the media, right? To go talk to key people, to report back to the rest of us what's going on. Finance Estonia is not an appropriate answer, I think. Because sure, maybe they have an abstract that obligation. What are they actually doing? Why aren't they presenting here today? Right? If they are that type of organization. Because we need this information. This is a global game. So we need to be tracking, we need to be bringing people together, understanding what types of ICOs are happening here and why, and most important, how can we use what we learned to take the next step up in a way that brings us to a better understanding of what blockchain and crypto assets can bring us in terms of business models. Because this isn't the 20th century anymore. This is now a new paradigm. It's no longer get really big and you'll survive, right? That doesn't work anymore. Rita Gunther McGrath wrote her book a long time ago, The End of Competitive Advantage, saying big isn't necessarily better. Agile is better. Right? Agile, so you come up with more value added, in earlier stage investment, that you can manage the risk in ways that people haven't thought of doing before. This is where we will prosper, right? This is the future for us. And, yes, sir.
Yeah. What's the difference between like a traditional NGO or SRO? Does it have like special mandate?
Well, a traditional NGO is generally involved in solving a single problem. So, for example, you may have an NGO that is designed to prevent domestic abuse of women, or a child abuse NGO, or whatever. It's designed to solve a particular problem. They are not necessarily designed to network, right? And so they might, but they might not. An SRO is designed to talk to regulators and everybody else in order to generate learning about a problem, okay? Not necessarily advocate for any individual solution to the problem. I would say this is the major difference, okay? We have, by the way, also not NGOs, we have GONGOs, government-organized NGOs, another beast in the jungle. So anyway, that is, I think, the major lesson learned. I'm pretty much done. It's out of signaling that, okay, you've abused everybody enough, let them think and talk, do what they want. I'll just sum up a little bit. I hope you have learned enough about the SEC to understand this is a 20th century institution that was designed to solve a 20th century problem. And that's what they're doing. They do a really good job at that, right? They do a really good job at protecting mom and pop investors based on the tools they have. But they are not designed to solve 21st century issues about early stage investment. We need other thinking, more creative thinking, and not necessarily regulatory thinking alone to be able to handle that situation. Thank you very much. I hope it's been interesting. It's been great fun for me. I'm ready to chat with anybody here. Yeah. Is we okay with time?
Yeah, enough. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
So regarding the composition of the capital that invested in your ICO, so you've been talking about the US situation, right?
Yeah.
What if for the majority, I mean, I've heard a lot of things about money from Japan, South Korea.
Right.
As an ICO company, let's say, okay, US is probably 20% of the market. Can we just don't deal with it? Is it possible? They say, okay, we don't deal with U.S. regulation because money.
Sure, it's possible. If you have no connection to the U.S., you have no connection to U.S. securities law. Yeah, that is definitely possible. Okay, now when money flows from foreign investors into the U.S., now you have a different story. Or if U.S. money is involved with foreigners, but it crosses the border one way or the other, then it's a different story. But yeah, if the U.S., as I said, is a jurisdiction, U.S. securities law are not strictly extraterritoriality. And so what we're going to see, if the U.S. legal system cannot come up with good solutions to be able to do early stage financing with using crypto assets, the money will flow out of the U.S., just like it's flowed out of China, right? When China did its ICO ban, they said, okay, we'll move the money out of China. Anyway.
But is there any study about the composition, like how much percentage, like U.S.?
This is all too current for studies. We're talking about current events. Yes, sir.
Have you seen any offerings that are actually properly registered and prospectus published for any issues?
There are a number of ICOs that are seeking registration. I think Phaeton in Florida is one that already filed their registration documents, and they're saying we want to be a fully compliant ICO. Those documents have not yet been approved yet. And that's okay, and I think that's risk-free in a sense if you get the SEC blessing. But this is really expensive, right? This is not a solution that's going to move the ball forward for a lot of the startups who need that type of investment money because they can't afford what Phaeton is trying to do. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So we saw the chart about Estonia being pretty high up on how many ICOs are here.
Right.
Are we to assume that we all started ICOs here, things are fine, your legislative environment is well defined and all things will go well?
Well, keep in mind, this is very early stage. So the types of numbers you're showing here, we don't know who's behind them. We don't know where they're coming from necessarily, what they're trying to do, how many of these things are serious, how many of these things are frauds. It's very hard to tell. I would say, I think Estonia is, by and large, trading on its reputation. And Estonia has done a really good job of marketing itself as a digitally savvy country. And it has reason to say so. We have really smart people here. We have a lot invested developing digital assets, we have e-governance, we have e-residency. And so this has been really good PR, and it's paying off. And also we have a reputation of being kind of laid back, that we don't have an aggressive regulatory authority, that they kind of let you go unless you create a big problem. I was told by somebody, the byword is that we're not going to really try to do anything unless Frankfurt tells us to, the ECB. So yeah, all of those things are very attractive. That does not mean that everything from a legal point of view is okay. Because when I go to Estonian lawyers, and I have done that, and say, okay, I want to talk about the legal risks in doing an ICO, they kind of smile and say, we have no idea. It's okay now, but who knows when the regulators will wake up and change their minds. So that's up to you if you want to take that risk. People are taking that risk because, relatively speaking, it's better than other options that they have.
Yeah, Michael, but it has been getting more and more precise.
Yes, that's true.
Like a few days ago.
Yes, that's right. I agree with that. And I think that's good, that there are efforts being made to try to lay out what it is we're trying to do. I think it's a great first step. When I looked very briefly at what the regulatory authority is laying out, though, I see a lot about prospectuses. I see a lot about requirements if you want to be safe. This looks like securities ought to be. It doesn't look necessarily all that innovative, but that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I didn't read it carefully.
The ICOs that go on here, do they register with Estonia, or they just show up?
No. Most of them are just showing up. And with their, I know law firms are getting requests from Russia, from Ukraine, from Cyprus, from all sorts of places to say, hey, we want to do an ICO in Estonia. Okay. And they just sort of set it up here. They use the facilities here. We have some people who are selling themselves as consultants to do white papers, and they have done white papers, but they haven't registered as securities. We have the world's first legal tech company doing an ICO here, Agrello. I don't think they registered with anybody, but they got a lot of money in when they did their ICO. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So when it comes to SEC, they can't really affect the other countries and other regions, as pointed out. They are mainly for the mom and pop back in the US.
Correct.
But there is a body, and this is the Treasury Department, that is actually, can really enforce its will on banks abroad, on different institutions, governments, and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering what's their position on crypto right now, how they are seeing this.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. And I would just, you mentioned the key point, which is money laundering. Terrorism has really been lousy because it's pumped up all the worries about money laundering, and it makes international cross-border transactions more complicated. But there are serious money laundering issues involved that anybody launching, no matter where you are, has to be aware of. And so that goes way beyond talking about the SEC. I didn't talk about that, but you're absolutely right to be concerned about it. And I can't get into it here. It's too complicated, but yeah, that's a concern. There's another concern I didn't raise, and that's tax. In the US, the IRS is very interested in profits people are making from crypto trading. And they're being very relatively aggressive to say, if you made money here, you got to pay tax on it. Well, the US isn't the only country that has tax laws on income or capital gains. And so all of these tax issues are another area of concern about how ICOs should be treated. On the money coming in, is it taxable? Right? As a corporate event, if there's a corporate income tax, do you declare that? In the United States, we have corporate income taxes. Estonia has a 0 rate. But in other countries, is that declared income when you bring in tokens? And by the way, you're not generating any revenue, so how are you going to pay those taxes? Yeah, good question. So that's another area of major concern too. Yeah. Yes, sir. I'll get to you sooner or later.
No, I got the answer already.
Okay, very good. Yeah.
I'm curious because we are not talking about the big gorilla in the room, because the regulation is a one side of the coin. The biggest issue is the legal enforceability of a token.
The legal what?
Enforceability.
Oh, enforceability, right.
Enforceability of a token. If you are in a possession of a token, either security or non-security, if you can't present that to the court and enforce your rights, then it's kind of an empty promise. So what is your view on that?
Yeah, that's, by the way, we could have another presentation on that issue too. I think that's a very good question. And the answer is that we have common law remedies that might or might not work. We don't have specific remedies for investors to say, hey, wait a minute, you're treating me unfairly. And by the way, in the American securities system, because it is very investor protected, you have certain types of corporate law issues that you can bring up if you are a shareholder that you believe have been treated unfairly or in violation of law under corporate law. Now, if you're a token holder, you don't have anything to do with the corporation, so you can't rely on that. Really, the only tool I would suggest is fraud. Now, every country has fraud laws, and some ICOs really stink, and of course, you could make a claim for fraud, but two problems. One, this is a new area. Maybe it's fraud, maybe it's not. Maybe you were just too stupid to invest in this. That may be your problem. You didn't really read the white paper. Most people don't, by the way. And also, so you get a judgment, let's say in Estonia, but the assets are in Kazakhstan. What are you going to do, right? And so this is a really serious concern as well, that it's one of the major reasons why the SEC is clamping down for investor protection early before these problems start metastasizing through the system. So I totally agree. This is uncharted territory too. In crowdfunding, we have the same problem. And in crowdfunding, the answer is, well, people generally risk very small amounts of money. And so they can lose it, who cares? You know, $100, $50, $200. You're kind of signing up to say goodbye to your money when you back a Kickstarter project. And that's okay, you know, because it's the benefit of just being there participating. In the crowdfunding regulations in the US, they have put to say you could only do that without accredited investors. With accredited investors, you can do whatever you want, but when people are not at that level, then there are limits of how much you can ask them for. So that's one way of thinking about future types of regulation, dealing with mom and pop investors around the world to say, hey, you know, this should be not big deal money. This should be just little amounts of money that you're bringing in. You don't want to take, you know, somebody's life savings on a white paper that turns into a fraud. So it's a very serious concern.
I'm just wondering, because Estonia, you know, Estonian law is different than US law. It's a codified law.
Right.
I'm not aware that anybody has presented a token to an Estonian judge.
I'm sure they have not.
Claim. So until we don't have that, everything is like just casino.
You're right.
It will not be a problem. I mean, if you are unable to do it yourself, you will hire an expert who will, I don't know, maybe using your private key or whatever, will check everything and write to the court that you own these tokens in these numbers, and that's it. I mean, this is not the problem, actually.
There you go. You have an opinion.
Yeah, but if you believe in theory of market efficiency, you could say that if you are aware of this legal uncertainty, you just price it in. You price this token with discount. That there's an uncertainty there. But okay, this is like who believes in the efficient market, who doesn't, but there's one way to think about it.
As I said, this is a lot like the automobile before traffic regulations, right? And before laws about automobile defects. Cars exploded. Nobody had any remedies. Nobody thought that was an inhibitor to using cars. We're a lot like that right now. You put money into an ICO. The guy disappears with your money. What are you going to do? Well, that's a good question. We don't really have clear legal answers for that. There is in the United States, by the way, under securities law, an answer, a 20th century answer, which I think is effective for that type of situation. And it is a very old idea, which is particular to the United States, and that is the securities law allow a private right of action under the securities law and a class action. And so a lawyer can bring in action against the issuers for disruption of the market, fraud on the market. And lawyers do that because they allow in the US what's called a contingency fee. They don't need a client to pay them up front, but they will get a percentage of the amount recovered, sometimes up to 30, 40%. And you can make a lot of money that way. We have lawyers in the United States, their whole career, all they do is wait for companies to violate securities law, bring a class action against them, and then walk away with a couple $1 million. So that's one way to go. But we don't, you're right, in Estonia, I don't know what to tell you that there would be an adequate remedy to the extent that an Estonian put money into an ICO, the money was not used, there was no return, the tokens are worthless, and what they would do about that, I think that's an unresolved question. I agree.
Just one more question.
Yes, sir?
From there.
Oh, yeah.
Not to take it too wide, I tried to narrow down, but well, the first part of the story was how somebody issued security and then spent a lot of time, energy, huge social resources to persuade the other side that it's not secure. But now, at the end of the presentation, there was again the claim that the problem we're dealing with is something totally new. What is not defined for me? What is actually new in this thing? What is the problem? What is so-called 21st century problem in investment?
Right.
What is fundamentally not there 10 years ago?
Good question. I think I would point to two things. The first thing is early stage investment.
What is not new?
It is pretty new. It started in the 1990s. This is the securities laws were written in the 1930s.
Securities laws,
No,
the
no. The securities law are still. Let me.
The concept of new companies is eternal.
Well, the concept of putting millions of dollars into startups is something that is relatively new. This was not done in the 1980s very much. In the 1990s, it became very common. And so this is a change in the financial markets with a whole new class of actors, angel investors, VCs, all of these people who are now mainstream. They are relatively new actors. So let me just say one more thing before you go ahead. So this is relatively new. The laws we have in place are not designed to deal with this type of early stage investors, except to say accredited investors can do that whatever they want. But they don't allow the rest of us in there. And so the push is, what about the rest of us? Can we play that game too? And the answer is, that's totally a new demand, and we're not sure. So that's new. Okay. The second is we're dealing with what Bill Mugayer calls a new asset class, crypto assets. This is something before blockchain that didn't exist. The crypto asset is not a share of stock. It doesn't give you any security rights.
It can be.
It can, but it doesn't have to be, and most don't. Because if it is, then you have to treat it like a security, and most people don't want to do that.
Why they don't?
Because it's expensive to register. They want to avoid all those expenses. They don't have that kind of money. You're talking maybe 20, 30,000, 50,000 bucks to do a registration, an IPO.
The problem is not new. The problem is just getting over the registration. Right? The fundamental issue we're dealing with is the same.
Yes, that you're right. I agree with that. But now there's more pressure because more people want to do it. So the market has changed. This is my basic point here. That the market, because technology is changing, the market is changing, and the pressures on the law are changing.
I come back from here that I would still claim that rather than looking for safe havens, one should look at the legislation. Because the problem is fundamentally there. It's not new in that sense.
Well, okay, that's your opinion. I respect it. Next question.
Yeah, but still, okay, this was the last one. I think that we can discuss it later.
Yeah, we have more discussion time. Yeah.
So the next part of this pre-event is a group discussion. So I would like to do it a bit different.
Oh, here it is.
So instead of having like a formal panel where certain types of people are sitting and talking really smartly about the topics, I would like everybody to participate. So there are like many different people here with very different background, and I made a lot of effort to get as wide perspective as possible here, but we'll see if they talk or decide to remain silent. But I will give you like 3 to 5 minutes to stand up and get some food and drinks, and then we will start. And if possible, I would like everybody to move this way. It would be easier for me. minge lihtsalt natuke sinnapoole. Lihtsalt.
Kas see Skype'i kõne tuleb sellesse paneeldiskussiooni sisse kuidagi või?
Ta tuleb kuskil poole tunni pärast, jah.
Okei.
Et lihtsalt see on nagu presentatsiooni moodi, et me mitte ei diskuteeri temaga, vaid tema esitab oma nagu nägemuse.
Selge. Tema ei osale selles diskussioonis.
Ta lihtsalt räägib oma juttu ära. No siin on ka tegelikult Michaeli ümber saate ka olla. Võtan oma vastu. I think you sit in the proper place, yeah. I just tried to push everybody towards you.
You're satisfied? That was okay?
Yeah, it was really good.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Everybody think about it. There's a huge number of issues with everything.
Yeah, it is. But I like your point that at this stage we shouldn't decide anything.
No, it's too early.
Yeah.
And I think this was, for example, they had the same thing when about electricity. People thought in the 1890s when the light bulb was invented, we've solved it. Now we know what electricity is for. It's for artificial light. Okay, so they wired all these houses and everything, thought the problem was solved. And then suddenly people started to say, by the way, you may not have noticed, but electricity can be used to power electric motors, and people want to use that in their houses, and they don't have any way to do that. No, we didn't think of that. Yeah. It took another 10 years before somebody invented the outlet for plugging. It's hard to believe, but it took 10 years. And so we often get sort of mesmerized by what people tell us about what we know now, and we think that's the end of the story. Not by a long shot here. I have not seen any business models that I see are reproducible easily using crypto tokens. They fit a particular situation, maybe, but we don't really understand more generally, what their advantages are, how they can be more generally applied. It's so early that it was just last year that people started to do these things.
I totally agree with you.
Very, very early on. And I think it's going to take another 5 or 10 years before we start to figure it out, to be honest. Anyway.
Yep, thank you.
kui nad oleks kohe keelata, siis käima läinud. Pöörid ongi ja kõik. Aga kui nad sinna on väljastada, kõik mida SEC saavutas sellega, et federeerib, see raha läheb õigust.
Sa räägid nagu seda juttu, et seadused ei kehti, kõik süsteemid on olemas, tegelikult on.
See küll, see kõik on nii kallis, et õigussüsteemid läbi suruda ja teha piloot ja teha pretsedentidega. Sest keegi pole seitsme
See pretsedentidega, see ei lähe, asju pole.
Kõik on õige,
So, okay. I will be moderating the group discussion. Just a few words about myself. At the end of the last year, I ended my 10-year career with a local regulator or supervision authority. I worked there as a risk manager of a securities market. So yeah, 10 years. I look older than I am, so when I was hired into MSA, I think for 1.5 years I was the youngest one. Yep. Now I switched a bit, and now I'm the oldest one in the organization.
in the new organization, startup. So, like, I think it was like the last chance for me to do a really risky thing, and to explain that where did I get this courage to make this move for the 1.5 year with the FSA. I also headed a fintech working group there. I saw a lot of young people with great ideas. So I thought that, yeah, maybe there's a chance for me as well. And this is like was the starting point when I decided that I need to make a change. So prior to the FSA's career, I used to be a securities trader with a very small company, but we invested our own funds into US securities market. So I know like the, how do you say, like the market side as well, not only the regulatory side. And as I told you already, I'm not that old as I may look. So some would categorize myself as a millennial. So we will get to this point later on in the presentation, but usually, at least in media, you see that the way that young people are thinking is a bit different than people used to think. And I think this like social changes also impact the way we should, let's say, finance startups or do some other things. There's a implication from social side as well, not only technology, not only regulation, but also the changes in society also, so to say, invite or give way to new possibilities or need for a change. So what I wanted to say is that discussion here is being streamed, but still I would like to apply a Chatham House rule, which means that you can take all the information that you get from here, but you shouldn't say later on that this person from that organization said that thing. So why to apply this rule is that I would like people to be more open and not to be like boxed by the organizations that they are currently working with. So hopefully this makes life a bit easier and discussion more fruitful. So I really encourage you to react, ask questions from me, ask questions from other participants, and speak your mind. As the title maybe like supposes that we aspire, or I aspire, an ICO best practice as a way forward. This is not true. So best practice is just one option. Rather, I think that after discussion, we should maybe specify a few things or put few things into this, like a future specification that that we need or want to have in the, let's say, regulation or best practice or whatever will come after that. So we sort of like specify what do we want to achieve. So to outline what I'm planning to do, I decided to like divide this discussion into 4 different blocks. First of all, I would like to get some sense and also give you some sense what is the current status quo here in Estonia mainly, but as we are part of the European Union and securities market regulation and financial regulation more broadly is quite harmonized in European Union, so we have to take this this union-wide perspective also into account. Then we talk a little bit about risks, and mainly I have made one slide about how the regulators or market supervisors see what kind of risks are listed in their notifications or their publications and statements. Then I would like to explore with you the opportunities that blockchain technology as some say, DLT, distributed ledger technology, entails. And if we manage to do 3 of these, and everybody is smarter, leaving here, I think that we have managed and we have been quite successful. But if after these discussions we can list some so to say expectations for the way forward, I think that we have shot the moon. So hopefully we can manage to do these 3 blocks, but if we can do the 4th one as well, it will be really good and satisfying for me. So, Michael,
yes, sir.
You use the term crypto asset, not cryptocurrency, whatever. So I would also use the term crypto asset because I also think that it's more of an asset, new asset class than a currency, and it's quite cool to notice that for the past 2 months I've read a lot of articles. And I've seen that Christine Lagarde from IMF has also switched. Now she's also using crypto asset as a term, and also French Central Bank, Bank of England. So there has been some learning, I think, and we are getting more convergence about what we are talking about amongst the entrepreneurs and startups, and also the regulators. I will not explain into more details why I think it's not a currency. It is almost the same as Bank of England, not Bank of England, but French Central Bank just released. So I think that let's say Bitcoin don't have these characteristics, but are usually related to currencies or fiat money. So there's this very interesting Google sheet, yeah. Anne, who is making or participating in this Google sheets listing all the ICOs connected to Estonia?
Yeah, our law firm is doing that.
Okay. So according to the last information that I got from this document is that there are 42 ICOs that have some sort of link with Estonia. It's quite a big number, and it's very hard to estimate how much money they have raised. But I think that it is more than 1 million euros to date, or even much more. Yeah. So it also depends what are the prices of the underlying crypto assets, but yeah, it is quite big money, and it's even more bigger if you consider Estonian GDP or the size of our economy. So currently we don't have any specific regulation. I want to state specific. So the current approach is that the framework currently in place applies. And it was a few days ago, Estonian FSA published a new article. Unfortunately, it's only in Estonian, which explains even further what kind of current legislation applies if you are doing or planning to do an ICO. And if anybody knows more about this, can elaborate what's the how to distinguish between different characteristics of the tokens. You can do it. Yeah.
I think the main characteristics would be the idea of equity token.
Maybe you should stand up.
Sorry. Or the revenue sharing token. Even I would say equity token, revenue sharing token is a different thing, because one is just participation in revenue. Equity gives you much more things than just usually than just revenue. But the other thing, which is more popular, is the utility token. And I have always, as I have worked making token model which works in this utility scheme, I have actually found some kind of formula for that. Actually, the utility token, if you look into this, it's a proper one when it's the fuel for crowdsourcing. It's when the project has a product which comes into existence not only from the project's development itself, but some unlimited participators from all around the world. It's just like, it's similar to Ethereum, where there is miners all around, but also projects where you have, for example, a platform, but this platform has really a product and some other people all around the world put some content into that, which others, the purchasers of, or the users of this platform, they paid for this content. And the platform framework provided by the project just provides the possibility to have this information organized. Then the token gets some value because the users pay for it, and then the token is distributed to all the participants of the product.
But what do you think, is the current regulation clear enough for you?
Of course, the current regulation does not specify anything about such new models. This is something very new because doing such of like funding crowdsourcing like this through the fact that some people pay for the product and then it spreads out to a lot of people. It's obviously very, very problematic to do this with the regular financial methods using banks and so on. So of course there is nothing really precisely describing this.
Yeah, but do you agree that even with this kind of model, it's not operating in a like legal vacuum? So there are rules applying, or even if they are like very general ones.
Yeah, absolutely. There is the laws of obligations, the contract law rules. Of course, the criminal code applies all the time. You cannot do fraud, stuff like that. There is something, of course, but it's really hard to put everything together to get a clear picture of what it actually is.
So, is it clear for you?
I would say
you are Estonian, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can read and write in Estonian. Is it clear for you? If you want to do this kind of token sale, what are the characteristics of the token which will prescribe what kind of regulation you have to follow? Is it clear for you?
No, for starting project, it's not clear.
Okay. Okay. So, okay, thank you. In addition to the applicable current framework or current regulation, FSA has also, so to say, stated that even with this kind of explanations or this kind of guidance given, with every kind of with every different ICO or every different type of token, it's like a case-by-case approach still. So even if you feel that I sort of understand what I'm doing and I sort of understand what I'm planning to do, it would be still wise to send this information to FSA and ask their opinion as well. So they have listed what kind of pieces of information there has to be in your inquiry, so that they can give you an educated, so to say, guess what are you doing and what kind of rules and regulation will apply.
Marek, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I mean, I just saw the list of questions.
Yeah.
How many cases have you seen submitting ICO details to the FSA, and whether it's advisable for FSA to give any response? Because once FSA says, "Oh, we are cool with that," then the next day the ICO issuer will just write on the homepage, "FSA approved coin."
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get my head around.
Yeah, it is very complicated to get like this kind of certainty in the first place from an FSA. But even if I'm not working with FSA anymore, I still cannot tell you what happened when I was working there. But I can assure you that there have been many approaches to FSA, and FSA has given, in my personal opinion, quite good feedback to them. And there hasn't been cases that would like backfire to Estonian FSA. So there have been cases submitted to Estonian FSA. There have been meetings, there have been discussions, there have been information sparring back and forth with entrepreneurs or companies planning to do it. So I wouldn't say that it's not that like dark. It's sort of gray. If you so I would encourage to send this information.
Is this a nucleus for a FSA sandbox in Estonia? To just make it, institutional.
If I could, I've actually been involved in discussing this in cases, and what I've been told by legal advisors, Estonian legal advisors, is that these are informal opinions. It's sort of like an IRS advisory opinion. It's not binding. So just because they say we don't see a problem with it doesn't mean there's no problem with it. It just means they don't see it now. And so that's a marginal step up from we have no clue, but it's not intended to be a certificate of okie dokie. And so in a way, this is done by a lot of regulatory agencies to encourage people to tell them what they're trying to do so they have a better sense of what the market, where the market's going. So from that perspective, I think it's okay. On the other hand, what I was also told is that what they're doing basically is they're only really flagging obvious problems. And so they're not really going into these things at a level where you could feel pretty secure about something that is complicated, but they're just trying to weed out the really ridiculous stuff.
Yeah, and just a small remark, at least I'm not a lawyer, but according to my knowledge, Estonian FSA don't have this kind of tool to give this kind of like firm letters. Yeah, so there has to be some.
It's informal, it's not binding.
Yeah.
It just helps with
May I raise one question?
Yep.
I mean, countries are in this big political family, and they have to get along. So,
no, they don't.
like when they're allies, and they are located next to Russia, and so how much Estonian government in their decision has to align with US?
Has to what?
Has to align with US. How much could there be political pressure?
With the US?
This is really difficult question. I mean, you can do whatever. You can do a political study for 10 years and then read all the statements.
Opinions.
Yeah.
Non-binding.
Yeah. What I saw is that prior to the SEC first like press release or first guidance given, there was nothing going on. Like everybody was like sitting in the trenches. But when SEC came out, everybody said, yeah, this is the way we go. We apply the current framework. This is the way to go. But prior to SEC, I think that there were no.
I think the China ban was pretty early.
Okay. Yeah.
China banned ICOs, and everybody was whoa. That was pretty early on.
Okay.
I just would comment that I think Estonian regulators are very concerned about what's happening within the Central Bank of Europe and in Germany. And if they are going to call from Frankfurt, they will certainly pay attention to what the European institutions say. They don't want to be an outlier on European law.
Yeah, European institution, maybe not Frankfurt, but ESMA, as the one is more responsible about securities market, or the ESAs, even more broadly. Frankfurt has little to do with that currently.
But if the US
only if Kaspar Korjus said that we will have Estcoin, then Frankfurt came in.
But if the US ambassador called and said, hey, we think you should not approve that ICO.
I have no completely unrelated topic to the regulation side. because there are some people who are more informed than myself. I mean, how likely it is that if you run an ICO and you reach tens or hundreds of millions for whatever reason, and you have some what they call whales that step in the early stage, how likely it is that if you fail, you have a triad knocking your door and cutting off your fingers?
Might happen.
I mean, there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of money in there that is untraceable.
Yeah. This could happen. This could happen, but I'm unfamiliar with. But it also can be that this graveyard bias, that you don't learn about the things that have gone wrong. These are not like nobody wants to put this information in public. You know that I want my fingers.
Aside from money laundering, which does go on and is using crypto assets, so we all know that, where there are some very bad actors doing that, who you really don't want to be involved with. So, yeah, that's a particular area that would be a grave concern, because you don't know what they're going to do. But when you're talking about other than that type of activity, so far, it seems that people have been relatively benign about chasing their investments. That doesn't mean it will stay that way, but that seems to be the kind of Western norm, certainly in the United States anyway, that people are not pursuing these remedies that you suggest.
Because I was speaking to one person from a leading security company, ones that are advising governments and big corporations in different security matters, including cybersecurity. And he's quite informed. And I asked him the same question. He said that, oh boy, some people will definitely go missing.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
That was his opinion.
It's like a mechanism of self-regulatory that you shouldn't do this kind of things if you don't want to.
Can I make a comment here? Because this is a real issue that popped up in Estonia recently when Agrello did their ICO. And the person who wrote the white paper, Alex Norton, said, I don't want anything more to do with it. I'm totally dissociating myself from these people. They're not doing what I wanted them, they thought they were doing there in the white paper. Now, that's a serious issue, a public issue. And in my view, it should have been publicly resolved. In other words, Agrello should, okay, in order to be able to operate above board, you've got to address that somehow. They chose not to. I think that was a mistake. But usually, when it comes to investor relations, this has been the norm. When you have a problem, talk about it. Don't pretend that everything's okay and that nobody will care.
I would turn this over. We actually did communicate about this and say our opinion about this.
Okay. So, yeah.
But you committed an opinion, but it was not. I saw more about the objection than I saw the response. So I don't know, maybe you did, I didn't see it.
What kind of response do you think there should be?
Okay. Let's go case, not go case specific. You can later
we'll talk later.
Bilaterally. But I like that you mentioned like investor relations. Yeah. So my next question would be that, what do you think, how ICO startups are different than like traditional companies or traditional startups? So what are the main differences? What do you think? What do the ICO startups have to do differently? If you think that these are like public companies from the day one, so what would you do differently if you are a public company instead of private company?
Yeah, can I ask a similar question, like related question? Yeah. So from those 42 ICOs or other ICOs, how many of them you think that are really taking advantage of blockchain as a technology? Mm-hmm. Like how many of them really need that, as opposed to how many of them just want because ICO has money and we want funding from that? So do you
I don't have this answer. Maybe some other people.
60–70% of this is bullshit.
Just because there's money.
Yeah. And you're not even talking about like the blockchain usage. You're just saying that
it's total bullshit.
Total bullshit. Yeah. So
Mark, it's an interesting question. I mean, I'm a bit older as well. I mean, end of 90s there was our first internet hype, and on European stock exchanges we saw interesting companies like www.dentist.com. So the promise was that using the website, Web 1.0, you will, repair your teeth. I didn't see any connection between an app and, repairing my teeth. And these companies had hilarious valuations, 10 million, 20 million, early phase. So it's a kind of a deja vu what we have now.
Yeah, sure.
We have seen that.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, maybe we are experiencing a similar situation what we had end of 90s, where you had virtually bullshit companies getting high valuations, promising something what can't be fulfilled, and this is exactly what we have now. Seeing the startup scene outside Estonia, I think that startup 2.0, what we see in a proper startup, early phase startup, has a great business model, has validated the market, has a product market fit. ICOs don't have a product market fit. They don't have it. It's just an empty promise.
I actually disagree to some extent. Is that even in the .com era, you have small percentage of company that succeeded, right?
Yeah.
I think
it's a percentage. I agree. I mean,
I just disagree with the all part. I think with some technical understanding of this technology, I think it's an advantage for people to have some understanding and know that what's the bullshit part and what's the actually real part. And I think there is certain percentage also. Even I would agree that it's kind of bubble phase.
We analyzed 200 ICOs, and we didn't find any ICO which made sense. Zero. And none of these ICOs had even a kind of a sound regulatory and legal background. So I think that there are differences.
Yeah, maybe you had a bad sample.
Exactly. This is more true. Yeah.
I can tell you one more.
But Marek, the same thing I think the VCs and the angels can say about startups, that they actually who applies to them, they will pick out of 1,000 to 10 where they actually put their money, and it does take a lot of time for them to look through this what you say 400, you said 200. 200. If you look through 200, you get nothing, and you have to get 800 more in order to get 10. And it does take time. But I think to answer your question, what is ICO startup versus a startup? Then for the VCs, for the venture capital, it does make the investment part easy, if we call it an investment again. It does make it borderless, it does make it global, it does make it accessible, it does make it in your own backyard, like that you can do something really quickly without all the mess. And it does automate the process of doing investments, and again calling them investments.
I think there's a one big difference. Thank you for the hint. VC invests into a team. So is ICO investor investing into a team?
Could be. I know a few ICO investors who pay attention only to the team, nothing else. Nothing else matters. Not the descriptions in white paper, nothing. Only the team, because he thinks that this team or the members of that team needs to keep their face, and this is like the best guarantee.
Yes, but this is minority. But let's say the overwhelming majority. Investors are investing into tokens, not into a team.
But that's how the majority of people lose money.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
So I would just add, a fundamental aspect of this, I think, which is different than the tech startups that all exploded, is that when you're doing an ICO, issuing tokens to an ecology, you have to be able to show a credible argument that the token holders will get value out of the tokens, not just by holding them and waiting for them to appreciate, but they have to be able to do something with them in an ecology that makes sense in a business model. And I think not many people know how to do that yet, and so you get a lot of sort of hot air about, oh, the token holders can exchange their tokens, and
They can buy plastic bags or do whatever. But this is why we're so early into this business model development, because that is fundamentally a networking issue rather than a company issue. And very few companies are heavily into networking beyond their company door. And so we don't see very good network-based business models. And I think that they are coming, but they're slow coming.
Yesterday I saw a website, to my surprise actually, it's called ICO Brief, or briefing.com, if you could search it. Because I'm involved in an ICO project, and we didn't pay them anything, but they did an ICO review, actually a very thorough review. They analyzed the team, analyzed the technology, analyzed the business team, technology team, and they give overall a score. So that might be a first filter for people who want to invest in ICO, that they are not paid. Right, so they just do the ICO review whenever there's a new ICO project coming out, and they give a score, and you can read it and make your own judgment. I think that kind of helps. Yeah.
And they were accurate, sort of secretly judging your project without knowing you?
Yeah, we were to our surprise, yes. Huh. No one told them anything, and they just posted a review.
And their score, you think, is fair? That
I think it's quite fair. Yeah.
I would add a thought to this. It might even be a little bit too early to judge. Yes, you can judge the teams, I agree. But it might be too early to judge the market, because Ethereum, which was the first kind of like famous kind of crowdfunding, was 4 years ago only, or even less. And the bigger boom started 2016. Now last year was the very big boom. Now if you think from the kind of VC perspective, companies usually take 4 or 5 years to build up a proper company which actually generates revenues and so on. So it might also be a little bit early, and these Amazons and so on are not yet popped up. So I believe they might pop up, but I also agree that currently I'm also struggling to see much companies that really deserve their peak token value if we talk about the top 20 in the coin market cap. Maybe Ripple is a good example, which actually delivers a product, but yes, there is a distance between the actual token and the product. But it might just be that it's also too early.
Yeah. So there's one very interesting person trying to connect with us via Skype. We will see if we can manage to do that. So can Florian hear us? If not, then maybe we'll skip it for later. Oops.
Who is Florian?
Mysterious guy.
Oh.
So if he wants to introduce himself, he can do that. If not, then the same rule applies to him as it applies to you. So.
Remain mysterious.
Yeah.
Can I make another comment about this really interesting question about these business models? And that is, we are only recently becoming more fluent in innovation systems. In other words, we used to think innovations are ad hoc. We're only recently understanding what types of networks can make innovation happen more regularly. Bringing a specific type of network together that lowers the risk of early stage investment. And so because we're very early in that and we don't really know precisely how these networks work, it's obvious we're going to screw it up a lot. But it's clear that the teams that you're talking about who are going to be working on these should bring different types of expertise into that network, and we don't really know how that dynamic should play out on a larger scale, to scale that dynamic. And so we're really at a very early stage. I think we're going to get there over the next 5 or 10 years.
Okay, we'll see if we can greet Florian. But it's too silent. No, it's really silent. I think that.
Sinu arvuti on ju heli taga.
Yeah, but he didn't hear me from my computer.
Okay.
So
maybe you switch computer. Try.
But
Can you connect this computer?
Not to there. In here I can, yeah.
Yeah.
In here I can.
Yeah, go there. He will connect.
Okay.
So we have like small statistics gathered about Estonian ICOs now, but there are like different initiatives going on regulatory level as well. And one big project that is, so to say, being launched, where I think and Anne think and many other people think. Yeah.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
Hi. Hello.
Hello. So Anne, will Florian introduce himself?
Can you introduce yourself, Florian?
Yeah. Okay, so hi everybody. Thanks for bringing me in remotely. Some of you I think I have met while I was visiting Estonia in Tallinn last year in September. So I'm a lawyer in Germany. I've been active in the blockchain space for a number of years, and I have been active in several capacities. But I have also worked in, or I am working with projects that have done ICOs or are doing ICOs, and I was asked to speak to you tonight quickly about the regulatory situation of ICOs in Europe and internationally, and I will try to give you a quick overview. I'm sure most of you basically share that knowledge already, yeah. Do you guys understand me well, or is it kind of painful? Because depending on that, I will talk very quickly or just quickly.
Oh, very well.
If you could do it quickly, this is our first preference. Thank you.
Perfect. So I assume you can see my slides. Is that correct?
No. I'll do my best to get them on screen, but for a while I have to go without them.
So I do screen sharing. Do you see them or not? Because that depends on what I tell you.
The screen sharing don't work because we use different computers.
That's the moment when.
Okay. I can either send it to you via PDF or just talk freely. What do you prefer?
Maybe if you maximize his window, he'll show it on his screen. We could see from that laptop.
You can,
Yeah. Let's do it this way. That
That's
just
romantic.
Just
Let me
speak.
say that
If you can send them to Mark, then Mark can put them on.
actually gets to talk.
You have Mark
You have a free evening office there. You have a free evening, I can see.
Okay. Perfect. So basically in Europe the situation is that there is there is a lot of activity in Europe. We all know that, a lot of startups that want to do stuff, and strong communities all over the European continent. And the regulatory situation, there are some financial market regulators. So there are basically three categories of regulators, I would say right now. First category are those, the early movers, that basically made it possible for the companies that have done ICOs in the past to do them. So we're talking Switzerland, we're talking other countries, like I have a list here. I'm just going to, okay, yeah, sure. So we have in Europe we have Switzerland, we have Gibraltar, we have Malta now, we have Liechtenstein, and internationally we have Singapore, Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, Panama, Vanuatu, which is a real island close to Strait. So those are from a regulatory perspective, they are the early movers. What did they do? So it wasn't really about the low taxes, I think, for which those countries are famous, but it is actually the fact that it was possible for companies, for startups, to get individual case-by-case permissions to do an ICO from that country. that was really the main reason why those countries turned out to be early movers and attracted a lot of companies and have very, very kind of busy work because lots of companies want to come. And the second category is the group of countries, and that partially the first category is included in the second category, which is a list of countries in Europe that have issued an opinion by their financial market regulators about the legal status of ICO. And there we have, for example, Switzerland, which was one of the first to do it in 16th of February 2018. We have Germany, where the BaFin has published a paper on the 20th of February 2018. We have France that published a paper on the 22nd. And I'm not sure if Estonia has a formal publication on it, but there is a growing number of countries that issue those. Basically, so for example, if you compare the Swiss one, where Switzerland was certainly one of the first movers, and Germany, which is kind of not a first mover really, we can see that they're kind of very similar. They basically say, well, we have established laws on what is a security and what is not a security, and if you fulfill all the regulations from MiFID II, or some in Germany's case, also some other kind of just national laws, then you are a security, and it doesn't matter that you call yourself a token, even if you call yourself a utility token. So you have to follow the respective procedures. And they also acknowledge, however, that there is a new category of asset called a utility token, and also cryptocurrency and payment token, and it's all different names, or more or less from a regulatory perspective the same category, which is that you can actually create and sell such a token without being considered to sell a security. And some kind of interesting question, detailed question that arises obviously is the question, well, what is it about those tokens that promise to have a functionality in the future but actually don't at the present moment? A lot of those are actually being traded on secondary markets, and the question has to be asked whether they are utility, whether they are securities because they represent some form of debt or something according to these American Howey tests, this kind of idea of I don't know, the certain investment and so on which it all depends by a certain company, like this work by one company and so on, and a certain promise of return and so on. And if you take that as kind of the model, then obviously the question at least has to be asked. And in the United States, it seems to turn out that actually those tokens are considered securities. And now Switzerland on the 16th of February has issued a statement where they say, if utility token functions solely or partially as an investment in economic terms, FINMA, which is basically the authority of Switzerland, FINMA will treat such tokens as securities in the same way as asset tokens. And in Germany, this is unclear. They haven't talked about it. And I think an interesting country is France, which has actually done real stuff. They have passed a law in December regarding certain types of securities that can be traded on blockchains, but they also, on 22nd of February, issued a a paper as an official statement where basically they introduced the notion of an ICO visa pass, which kind of gives you a certain level of credibility that you can signal with in the market that you are kind of have been vetted or kind of audited, or let's say at least published a certain minimum requirements of information.
Maybe I can interrupt here. So, just to speed things up, in your personal opinion, what kind of jurisdiction or what kind of regulator has done the best job according to your personal opinion?
Instead of saying the name of the country, let me tell you the two things that are no, three things. The good regulators right now
The sound went down.
For case-by-case analysis, and they actually put the people in place in the agencies to handle the caseload, number one. Number two, those jurisdictions give the banks in their country concrete guidelines regarding what KYC and what information needs to be known about the source of the funds being invested in ICOs, so that they can accept that money once it has been exchanged into fiat currencies on the market, okay? And I think those are the two main aspects that made the first successful movers in that space successful. And I think the next step for the other countries is to come together and form new governance bodies for those questions and derive and build a international standard that might, for ICOs and so on, and that might possibly even have some form of an implementation in specific code or protocols that companies can use to kind of, you know, automatically be compliant with international rules on ICOs and token sales and so on.
Okay, so Florian, two takeaways from you. One is that there has to be an international approach to it because it's cross-border, and the second thing is we have to explore the ways how to make the use of the protocol and the code to put some sort of standards or some sort of so to say regulation into code.
Exactly.
Yep. So thank you, Florian. We will go on here.
Thank you too. Have a good day. Bye bye.
So before we eat a bit more, I would like to end with this risks table. This is my personal takeaway from the different statements from different regulators. I wanted to make an overview of what kind of risks they are highlighting regarding ICOs. So what I have seen is that many European regulators or supervision authorities, they just copy what ISAs are saying, EBA, ESMA, which are like the European supervisory authorities. It's sort of same with the Estonian FSA. FCA has taken a little different approach. Their statements are more, how do you say, like friendly. They don't see that many risks, maybe, at least for that what I learned from their statements. And as you can see, the least X marks are in the column of FINMA, which is a Swiss regulator, and they have like their own interest there because in Zug there's this big blockchain valley, and they see really Crypto Valley. Okay, yeah. So I think that the Swiss government sees big potential here, and also historically they have been quite involved in financial sector, and I also put IMF here because their view is a bit broader, and they were like with Bank of France, they were like the only ones who associated clearly the money laundering with ICO projects. This was like an interesting finding. I thought that everybody will highlight the money laundering issue in their statements. And the interesting one is that the French central bank said also there's an environmental cost. So that, as you know, it takes a lot of electricity for mining and running these nodes around the globe, and they also mentioned that this is a big cost for environment, which is kind of interesting.
Can I make a comment about risk?
Yeah.
I don't want to disrupt the topic. Yeah. Okay. You know, as I listen to you, which is really interesting information, But notice where all of these risk assessments are coming from. They are coming from regulators. Regulators are paid people. They don't take any risks. They're not in the risk business. The risk business is dominated by investors, VCs, angels, and they assess risk all the time, and they are the ones who are saying, there's a whole new risk portfolio out there that we have to learn how to deal with. And you're not going to, a top-down approach on a risk assessment, especially one that was done in 1930 in the US securities law, is not the appropriate way to understand the new types of risks that are either acceptable or not. So I think we need a whole new way of thinking about risk.
Yeah, maybe it's like my personal problem that I didn't look for risk assessments from that perspective, from the investor side, from like the investor associations. But yeah, okay.
Not there.
Here we have to rely on your information that these risk assessments are not there. And yeah, just to go maybe more thoroughly, or just highlight a few of these risks. So here is the chart which should show how many ICOs have failed. On this horizontal scale, there are days from the launch of ICO, and here is the price multiplier. So one is, if your coin or token price is still 1, then you are like haven't made any success, or you haven't so to say failed either. It's like
yet.
Yeah. So on this chart you see that there are some tokens which are above the 1. So I think it quite good represents that the risk profile may be the same as with VCs. As already explained, that like 10% are like okay, and they're like 1 or 2 or 3% which are really successful, but the gains from these successful exits are bigger than the money you lose. But yeah, usually like the people from street don't take this kind of approach. They don't diversify enough. So this is like a problem maybe.
They do in crowdfunding. People take big risks and they know it, and they're happy with it.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it's not the picture is not that clear that everybody fail or everybody are successful, but I think that it's the same with early stage startups.
The red one that is really wrong was Bitcoin?
No, Ethereum.
I guess Bitcoin is not an asset, is that why?
No, Bitcoin wasn't crowdsourced, so to say. Didn't do an ICO. The Ethereum did ICO, so it's a little bit different. So one thing that regulators and supervisory authorities highlight is that there's a lot of volatility in these crypto assets. From my personal perspective, I wouldn't categorize volatility as bad per se. So volatility can be good as well if you take this risk intentionally. So what volatility gives, it gives an opportunity to fail fast or succeed fast. So it is like up to you how big ticket you want to buy. So yeah, I understand why regulators or supervisors are highlighting this, because they think as a common person from the street buying this and losing all their money or their savings. But if you do it wisely, then you can turn the volatility as an advantage, not as a disadvantage. And if you are a person with very small attention span, then this volatility plays for you. You can get your pain or your gain really fast. So I wouldn't categorize volatility as bad per se.
By the way, and what's coming here to do with this volatility are crypto index funds. And you're going to be able to buy into an index fund where experts are doing their risk assessments on crypto assets, and you can buy what sort of platform risk assessments are that you'd like to take.
Or you can even hedge with the CBO derivatives.
Sure.
Yeah, but it's more complicated.
It's coming. There's already a crypto hedge fund in the US.
Yeah, and also the derivatives on the CBO. Yeah. But different question is how would you determine the real value of these assets? Because I think that you cannot apply the traditional ways to make an assessment. I wouldn't go more deeply into that, but there are scholars who say that you can apply game theory on it. Something that monetary theory also applies, because there are these ICO companies are sort of doing the job that central banks usually are doing, because not maybe big, but at least some portion of the tokens will remain with the company, so they can also adjust the demand and supply of the tokens. But it's a different question whether a startup can succeed in this kind of monetary policy if central banks are paid. So it's a big task to handle. But this is usually what they do. They make these funds and leave some tokens to balance the market price. There's one side for financial stability risk, but it's maybe too theoretical. I will skip it. There are some implications, or at least some regulators say that there's a way that these crypto asset markets can really hinder the financial stability. Most of them say it's too early to really have an impact on financial stability, but some say that there's a clear connection. At least they see clear connection. When things go bad, it could also hinder the financial stability. And I think that I will skip here. You have we have food here, so take a few bites and then we'll go on with our discussion. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was great. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Try to persuade you that this risk assessment business is going to change. I know it's a hard sell.
When you were arguing with this guy, I also there are some underlying which
one of the underlying changes he didn't get is when I was a lawyer, nobody talked about early stage investment. It just was stupid. Nobody did that, except it was your brother.
Risky, and you didn't have this economic scale. You cannot buy the small ticket because no legal costs and all the related costs are too big.
And so we have so little experience with the idea of early stage anyway. Like crowdfunding. I remember when crowdfunding came out and Kickstarter launched and everyone said, this is really stupid. Nobody is going to put their money in these projects. Boom, it exploded and crowdfunding is mainstream. It's exciting. Kickstarter has a Tokyo office. And people want to do early stage participation. They don't really necessarily act as the regulators. That mentality, I think, was by and large conditioned by the actual that it caused and so we have that in our minds. We can't allow risk. Risk is really bad. Sorry. The intuitive response of empathy is actually a lot smarter than people think. But we don't understand necessarily what to tell these people about these new types of messages. It's very interesting. And a big opportunity here in Estonia, because I listened to this guy Germany. Stuff. People say, this country is doing that. This is highly thinking outside the box about where we're all headed. We can do that in a small groups where we trust each other. We can do really well on this one. I think we should, because I see, for example, we have, look at this. I was discussing with IT this information. Who they want to do, they want to market more of these But to get really good at early stage investment risk assessments and then persuade people that we're good at it.
Yeah, we talk about like like biomedicine or whatever, bioresearch. Then the reach for the product is also global. So if you have the community already in place, you have investors everywhere, you have all the connections. So if you succeed in getting like approval, yeah, this is good trial.
They want to see the team, not just in the university, but they want to see the various companies that they need to bring this research people all together. We don't have any teams here. That's what they want to understand. It'll take those types of techniques and show it. And they want to talk about the risk is they actually happy that the past but that's all they want to show them.
I think that it rises the probability, if you know about this community surrounding you, it rises the probability that you will find the talent that is really needed at this point in time in the project. If you are doing it like in a box in your like small town university, maybe the idea is cool, but you don't
He does a lot of this stuff. Steve was saying, he started a whole training program for researchers to try to help them understand. He's heard them researching. He said these guys are in there, they're everything. They walk out and go, oh my God, I didn't understand how it's actually about. And he said this type of connection is really great. I think this is really fun. Thanks very much for your presentation. No, I appreciate it.
Anywhere in the world.
teada siin.
ma loodan, et
ei, ükskord vastupidi, kuidagi nagu viimasel ajal vaata igast üritusi on hästi palju onju ja siis nagu ütleme sinu üritus, ma ei osanud midagi oodata, lugenud seda, tulin lihtsalt kohale, sest ma mõtlesin, et äkki sul on mingit abi vaja, äkki midagi proovima teha. hästi nagu asjalik, sisuline ja väga huvitav. Kusjuures ma ei ole üldse nagu asjaga kursis, selles mõttes, et seda ma seda jäätan nagu hoomata või aru saada. Nagu hästi üles õigetud. See väike siis seotus ja just õige koha. See oli see ka on pigem
nagu ma sissejuhatuses rääkisin, 3 päeva
KYC on Coinbase or in bank, you cannot, because it's, but this is you can move. This is smarter. NJORD is
Okay guys, can you sit and find your table? Hey guys. So guys, we have a few more slides to go through. So now we leave the bad stuff, so to say, the risk part, and move more towards the opportunities. Michael already explained in a few sentences what is the potential of this technology and what could be done differently and why it is different than the world we used to know, or the SEC used to know, or SEC knows still. So if you see some presentations about innovation or presentations about new technologies, you usually get this kind of hype cycle chart as well. There's one consultancy which has like developed this kind of chart, and this is like very famous. And if you look, I think that the font is too small, but you can see that blockchain is currently here. 2 years ago, blockchain was here. So the blockchain has gone through the highest part of hype cycle, where the expectations are really high, but also the expectations are the most further from the reality, so to say. Now we are getting this like hangover. It will be really bad here, but then the healing will start. So, but I think that it's more proper time to talk about blockchain implementation today than it was like 2 years ago. So, but still maybe too early to really know what are the real life application for blockchain. So the ICOs are like one use case. We will see if it fails or not, or succeeds. But at least we are like getting more and more realistic about it. So what do you think? What are like the big opportunities for, let's say, for Estonia to do something that will attract more ICOs here? Why should we do it? What we heard from the regulators or from the governmental agencies is that, okay, if we so to say make these ICOs legal and we regulate them, what will happen is that all the companies doing the ICOs will come from abroad,
and all the investors also come from abroad. And if something happens, then there's like no real benefit for Estonia. So the money comes from outside and goes back outside, and there's nothing left for Estonia, only to mitigate if something goes wrong. And then our regulator has to go and meet with other regulators, and yeah, they will ask, and it's like very, very tough position to be in. Yeah, to explain why we did it. So, but is this so black and white, or is it so black, or are there white too?
There's big white.
So yeah. So just once again, everybody.
But the same issue that Michael was speaking of earlier, that companies are registered in Delaware. They don't really do anything in Delaware.
Sorry?
They don't really do anything in Delaware.
So
except
they don't do very
What's
much.
the benefit for Delaware to do this kind of stuff?
There's some huge benefits. The first benefit is in terms of knowledge management. In other words, when companies come to Delaware, they come to Delaware not just with their registration, but they bring with them all of their legal corporate issues. And a lot of those get resolved in Delaware. So Delaware has become the United States center for corporate law development.
Legal fees then?
Yeah, not just fees, but knowledge and getting ahead of the curve in terms of servicing corporate America. So this is the legal technology that goes beyond the borders and brings more business, commercial and legal business into Delaware. Second,
sorry, is the average salary in Delaware higher than other states?
Yeah, it is. It's a rich state.
Okay.
Second is when corporations are there, they start bringing their networks to Delaware because that's a convenient place to connect with people. And so that has given Delaware all sorts of other opportunities to establish other types of business that they would have never seen before. So for example, Delaware became a center for the backroom work for credit card management. And enormous amounts of money were flowed into Delaware in order to make those investments happen, because it was the logical place to do it because the corporations were there. And any legal disputes about that would happen in Delaware anyway. So there's ancillary business that happens. Third is that it gives a networking opportunity to bring really, really smart people to Delaware. And so you get a much higher quality of discussion about policy, institutional development, and all of the types of things that make life better for everybody. So I'm not even mentioning taxes, registration fees, and all sort of other money that you can bring in. But I want to make a comment about Estonia and the benefits for thinking about ICOs here. And I don't think it has anything to do with the money, an individual money that might flow in and flow out of Estonia. Estonia should be looking to understand what are our high value assets that we can sell out from Estonia. And I don't think it's wood, I don't think it's other physical stuff, we don't have enough of it. We're not going to be a big manufacturing center. But we have a lot of really smart people who are involved in very, very early stage research in the sciences. And these are not well monetized right now. And so if we are developing technology to do better early stage investment, we'll understand how to monetize our own ideas better and bring more investment money that will be also making it easier to sell stuff globally that we need to sell so that we can prosper as a country.
Yeah, Estonia is famous for selling bad, you know. We cannot sell the stuff. So there's like this saying that Estonian salesmen like to aggressively wait for him to get the call, you know. He doesn't pick up the phone, he's just aggressively waiting. And this is a good salesman according to Estonian scale. So,
but there are a lot of competitions on various markets. I mean, if you take why Facebook, Google, and all have settled in Ireland in the
tax purpose.
Exactly. Yep. Why all funds are set up in Luxembourg.
So why real estate companies are from Netherlands.
So they don't necessarily have anything other than their corporate structure in that location.
Yeah.
And some smart people.
Yeah. And then one thing that we, Michael, we will discuss is that if we know that we are bad sales people, but we have quite good ideas, And many of these ideas, when we talk about like physics or pharmacy and stuff like that, if you get this funding from global investors and you already have built this kind of community or the network, then if you succeed with your drugs or your physics research, then you have community already in place to distribute the outcomes of your research very fast.
Not just that, but if you're a researcher and talk to university, okay, let's say in the physics department, and the university has networks into a community of people who know how to do early stage investment, the university can provide help to the researcher to connect with that, and you bring money into the university, not just to that individual researcher. You bring money into all of the team members who are then part of that early stage team. And so I think this is a gold mine for Estonia if we can master this technology.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it's really hard to convince like one or two VCs that this is a good thing, but if the ticket is small enough, maybe people are willing to take that bet. Yeah.
But by the way, if you look at the R&D budgets that people investing in development of products, they are enormous. There is a huge amount of money interested in these types of idea generation. The problem is that when you go outside of your controlled environment, there's just a lot of risk. And so what we're talking about is risk management here. Okay, let's do it well.
Actually, there seems to be still, I mean, 2 years ago at least, when I was in touch more, then there was a big problem of universities modernizing their legal structure in terms of this private-public or private scientific partnership. And the biggest issue has always been the IP that universities kind of want to keep. But then again, if it does not belong to the company or belongs only part of the company, they have problems with the next equity fund rounds.
Yeah, but we have a model for that. The Palo Alto Research Center, connected to Stanford, Stanford benefits from it because what they do is they sponsor high-level research projects that are funded by private companies, and the researcher, the private companies, and the university all take a piece of that early stage investment. And if it pays off, they all get rich. And they share it. And the researchers do it that way because it's less risky than focusing themselves on a single project, right? They get a salary from the university as well, so they make a little bit less. But okay, if you're going to get 30 million and you only get 15, is that so bad?
Okay, it seems to me that Estonia needs more consulting. Certain universities.
Yeah. So if we move from like this very general level more into like what are the opportunities that the blockchain can bring or the DLT can bring to the securities market or the market or the methods used to fund the company, then we see that at least I see that there's an opportunity to have a very cost and time efficient infrastructure. But if we think about like current securities market infrastructure, then we have so many entities there. We have CSDs, we have stock exchange, and we have a lot of intermediaries between these two. And this makes it like very, very, very costly, and also it takes some time. And there's an argument that this time delay is good, because if something when it goes wrong, we can like turn it back. But yeah.
What do you mean by time delay?
Like if you buy Tallinn share, do you know how much time it takes to be credited on your securities account?
2 days here.
The question was not for you, but okay, yeah, it is T+2 now, but it used to be T+3, so it takes a lot of time. But if you think about trades in the blockchain, it happens a lot faster.
Well, but the reason you consider this good is, and something might go wrong, is because something could go wrong because there's all these people interested in it. But here,
if it's automated.
All these are gone, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
they're...
So the current securities market infrastructure, at least for 5 years, has been moving towards, it's a straight through processing. So we take people out, we sort of automate the processes, so it can be faster, it can be cheaper, because cost for people is the most expensive. And this has been like the goal, to have the straight through processes. But I think that blockchain could, if implemented in a way that I see in my dreams, could make this could make a big leap.
Not only that, they also have security issues. It's more secure. As a decentralized platform, blockchain is much more secure than a centralized system. These centralized systems are all vulnerable to attack, but if it's decentralized...
If it is decentralized, it also can be like a permissioned DLT as well, then it's not that decentralized, yeah?
Why blockchain makes it faster?
Why it makes faster?
Yes.
Because everybody can interact.
If you can money layer is like 1 second.
Yeah, but securities layer?
It can be same as fast.
You really think?
Yeah.
Okay, it can be, I think. It can be in Estonia, because we have a direct holding market. But if you will think about the traditional markets in London, where there are a lot of intermediaries and omnibus accounts, I think you cannot do it in this case.
So it's going to be faster than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's not now.
Yeah.
The classic example is travel insurance for flight delay, where typically you sign up, and then if there was a delay, you file an application, they look at it, and they decide whether to pay you or not. With a blockchain smart contract, you can sign up on your telephone, pushing a button. They charge your credit card for the premium, and they are monitoring the departures of all over the planes all over the world. If it runs outside of the norms, the smart contract automatically disperses to your bank account immediately. So and you can't do any faster than that.
Yeah. So there's a good way to automate quite many things if you find a way how to code it. And there's also a chance that things can go wrong if you have like these loopholes in your code, and then things will happen really quickly. And, things go wrong really quickly. So I think that if we start with like this very straightforward things to go, then there's less chance that things can go wrong really badly. You shouldn't code everything. This is this is like street smartness. I also think that if we could implement this new technology into securities market, we could get a lot of lower barriers to the market access. We already explained that we can lower, so to say, the ticket price, because if we have this very, very costly system for securities market, then it's obvious that the intermediaries who can grant access for the individual to the securities market can say that, okay, you have so little money that you are not very profitable for me. But if the infrastructure is less costly, then obviously the barrier, the financial barrier to access this market should be lower. And there's like this buzzword called democratization. Okay, even it was promised that Bitcoin will democratize everything, and all the unbanked will get app in their phone, and everything will change. This hasn't happened. Even the founder of Ethereum, Vitalik, has had a few tweets saying that, okay, we have failed with this agenda, and we should really like pick up the work and do something that we promised. What is also possible, I think,
if things are done right, we can start to transact peer-to-peer. So instead of like giving you €5 in cash, I can also give you the crypto assets that, okay, I currently need money, give me a loan, I will like collateralize and give you my tokens. So all kind of like these more personal interactions can start to happen. Okay, there's also a risk involved. Maybe somebody will come and put a knife on your throat and say, okay, now give me all your securities that you have. It couldn't happen with a traditional system, because at least I haven't heard that there was like somebody, how to say, stripped out of securities held in CSD. But maybe there have been this case as well. But this could happen, of course. But I think that we shouldn't rule out like a big innovation which can make a lot of people's life easier, because there are these edge cases. We shouldn't take this approach because otherwise we will lose. As already said by Michael, if we implement this technology in a way that this ledger is decentralized, so there will be no single point of failure. So I haven't heard, at least during my career with FSA, that there have been CSDs which have like failed miserably. But of course there have been operational issues, operational power problems, but yeah, no such a big problem that CSD couldn't match its books in like a viable time. So maybe this is not a big problem, but still maybe later on there will be even higher cyber risks, and it is much more convenient to attack one certain single point than attack like the whole nodes network.
We have two really big Estonian tech firms that are focused on using blockchain for upgrading security, cybersecurity. Guard Time, and I can't remember the name of the other one. But Guard Time is global, and they're selling cybersecurity projects in China based on blockchain because they're better.
Yeah. So we already have some proof that it is better.
It's there. We're doing it.
And one like more important thing is that currently it's quite hard to execute your rights as a shareholder if you don't if you do a cross-border, so to say, cross-border investing. Okay, you can have like proxies there, and you can make somebody vote on behalf of you, but you cannot do it very conveniently if you really want to be hands-on into this company. We have had a quite good a successful pilot project that the NASDAQ did here in Estonia. As I already said, that Estonia has this direct holding market, which means that you have your personal, you have your securities accounts on personal level. So instead of having like this omnibus account where yours, and your securities are put on the same, so to say, bucket, we have like different buckets for every person. So they ran this pilot, and it was quite successful. And they also used the blockchain technology to do this project. And yeah, I just learned that after the success of this project, they are now planning to sell this software to governments, so that you can vote on your municipal governments also using this same thing. And it's quite a hot topic after the Trump election, and all these kind of controversies, so to say. And also, it's maybe not a topic for Estonia, because, as I already mentioned, we can see who are the owners or the shareholders of the different companies, public companies. But I think that blockchain can make it even more transparent. And we can see the trade information. And why this is good? I think that currently only the supervisory authorities are monitoring the market, the transaction. But what we have seen with ICOs or tokens, that the community will start policing. So if there are some weird things going on, like let's say that the founders are selling, maybe they cannot see and pinpoint it, but they say most probably this is the wallet which is owned by that, and then the community will rise. And I think that this also sounds like a self-regulating thing, that if this information is available, okay, maybe nobody will do it, but at least there's a chance to do it. And I think that this is also a good opportunity that blockchain brings about. Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. I just want to give a plug on Saturday. We'll have a more technical discussion of the thing you just discussed here. Actually, from a technical perspective, I'm a technical person, that from a technical perspective, a lot of things here could be done, maybe even better without blockchain, in fairness. And we will have one person from Gotham, and he actually would give a very nuanced answer to what you've just said. He will tell about what he really thinks if blockchain is needed for what they are doing. Maybe not publicly, privately. And I think that a lot of things are ideological. It's nothing to do with technology. Because a lot of things here, using current centralized technology, you could achieve it, maybe even better. But sometimes it's ideology, especially with money. Because we never had a money that existed more than fiat money. Existed more than 70 years in history. None of them. All of them died after at most 70 years. So about money is mostly ideological.
Okay. So just to sum up, the things that blockchain brought about, the shift in mindset can be used. So the opportunity is the shift in mindset, so to say.
Yes, mindset. And technological, if people don't know too much about technology part, they would think that blockchain provides a sort of technological innovation that can do so much more. But actually, technology-wise, it has a lot of limitations, and it has a lot of security issues, and it's not necessarily the best technological solution for a lot of solutions that people use. People are doing.
Okay. Neither was the automobile.
On Saturday we'll talk about it. We'll have a very long technical session. We'll discuss it.
Okay. Yeah. But yes, thank you for this perspective. And one last thing that I think that this new technology can bring about is the automation of corporate action. We already explained that there is a chance that you can put a few lines of code into the token, so to say, and currently, if the company wants to pay dividends, there's a lot of manual effort put into this kind of process. But if you know the wallet which owns the tokens, so to say securities or shares, it's quite easy to pay money to the same wallet using the other crypto or even give more shares or more tokens to the ones that are currently holding them. So there's a way that we can cut off a lot of manual labor and manual processes regarding corporate actions as well. So this is like the two blocks that I think that if we manage to go through these three, we are successful already. So I will check what's the time. We have lost quite many troops, but I think it's fine if we are having this really fierce battle. So it's okay.
Fierce battle.
I think we'll have that ongoing discussion, so it's fine.
Yeah.
But there's building on your last point, and yes, there are a lot of like the DAO also
that failed, but the idea was really good to have decentralized autonomous organizations, and at least we've seen that in Germany, for example, there are already foundations that have some sort of, that there are organically growing new forms, new legal forms of entities that are sort of slowly moving towards artificial intelligence, the robots kind of setup, where there is a code and there is a purpose, and you sort of have it going. And there is no tough management rules, there isn't any corporate reporting per se, but there is something that this organization does. And it might be crypto assets that it holds or manages, it might be something else, but it is sort of that the form of organizations is developing due to the fact that you get to decentralize something, and by decentralizing even the corporate registries or registries that maintain and show publicly the assets whom these belong to. By decentralizing those, you already open the gates to a lot of other forms of sort of ownership.
So to sum up maybe the discussion that we had here, I think it was really interesting. I really like to thank Michael and Eduardo. These two presentations were really, really interesting for me as well. And yeah, unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to go to start a list like what are our expectations and for the way forward that Estonia should take. But there are initiatives, as I already very briefly explained. There's this EBRD project, which tries to explore and map the ways how could we make a model of alternative infrastructure. I have quite high expectations for this project, and hopefully the Ministry of Finance will like discuss and explain and let the very broad public be part of this project, so that different perspectives and different views can be onboarded. And as Michael also said, that maybe there are no like real value for broadening this participation, but what you do is you educate people, and you never know who comes up with the next best idea. So here in Estonia, we are a small country. We know almost everybody. At least there are like maybe one or two persons between every other person. So we should like really use this opportunity. That it's very easy to set up networks, and we should discuss and explore these ideas as much as possible before we take steps that we cannot take back later on. So thank you.
Research shows that innovation ideas rarely come from experts, because experts are so full of knowledge in a given area, they often have difficulty thinking outside the box.
Yeah, I also, just a small remark, I read an article which was written by theoretical physicists who proved that it is better to give some research money randomly, instead of like giving the money to the most prestigious researchers, because you never know where the bang will come. So at least few of these funds have to go like as a lottery to other researchers as well. So yeah.
But I just wanted to mention that Florian Glatt, who was presenting his slides, are already up on Facebook on Estonia Legal Hacker slides, so you can go through them. Great. And also I included a link to his website. It's blockchain.lawyer. Also, Tartu's schedule is on everyone's table if you want to check, but it's also on Meetup. And I hope to see you tomorrow. Meetup. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for moderating, doing this last bit.